Chapter 201, Too Weak. The strength a symbiote can give is tied directly to the power of its host. The stronger the host, the more the symbiote can amplify them, not linearly, but exponentially. Dr. Lizard's physical strength already exceeded Spider-Man's. Compared with the ordinary cannon fodder hosts Riot had used before, he was a heavyweight. No wonder Riot felt like a god with Dr. Lizard fused to him. Axes of blackened mass sprouted from its arms, glittering coldly. Riot grinned with savage satisfaction. But Riot's joy curdled when he looked up and saw the man standing across from them. Kingpin had once been strong enough to trade blows with the likes of Homelander Harry. Then he drank the unfinished strain of the Superman serum and was restored to an even greater peak. Now his bulk filled the street. An ocean of muscle rolled under his shirt, which split and tore as he flexed. He smiled without heat. "It looks adequate," Kingpin murmured, more to himself than to his enemies. "I'll indulge you, 50%. He took a step forward and swung a fist that, in any normal man, would have been an ordinary punch. The sound it made was not ordinary, a thunderclap of compressed air, a sonic boom that ripped at the ears. Riot screamed as the shockwave struck and sent it reeling, torn away from Dr. Lizard's body. Riot tumbled through the air, howling as it scattered into tendrils. Dr. Lizard went with it. The impact shoved him backward into the restaurant behind him. He slammed into the wall and stuck there, dazed and bleeding, his mouth forming a soundless curse. He had expected a fight. He had not expected this. Kingpin watched them as if observing an insect that had simply failed to bite hard enough. "You are too weak," he said, flat and merciless. "If that's all you've got, you aren't worth my time." Dr. Lizard's chest heaved with anger and humiliation. His body shook, every limb trembling from the force of the blow. He bowed his head in defeat. Kingpin's eyes never moved to Dr. Lizard. They traced the silver-gray slime pooled on the pavement, and a stony expression flattened his face. "Even with a host like that," he said quietly, "Riot, you disappoint me." The slime stretched into a dozen quivering tendrils and then congealed into a snarling head. Narrow white eyes fixed on Kingpin. For an instant it seemed adoring. "Human," it hissed, urgent and feverish. "You are the strongest. Take me. Be my perfect host. Become invincible with me." Kingpin didn't flinch. He let the thing leap at him and take root inside him. Silver-gray viscera poured into his mouth and over his skin, wrapping him in a second suit. Riot cried out with glee as it felt raw power pour through the new body. This is it! At last! Invincible! Riot crowed, raising its head in triumph. Dr. Lizard watched the metamorphosis with hollow, fearful awe. He knew how much stronger he had been while merged with Riot. If Kingpin had truly become Riot's vessel, the man before him would be unstoppable. The grin fell from Riot's face as quickly as it had appeared. Panic replaced triumph. "No, what's happening? I should be in charge," it roared. The symbiote's voice was swallowed and then forced out, squeezed into the open air like a wary animal. It was expelled from Kingpin's body and flung back to the pavement, that reasserting itself into a new, ragged host, a terrified passerby who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A thin industrial sheen clung to Kingpin's skin, the only trace left of Riot. Kingpin's expression did not change, only a ripple of amusement at the failure. He flexed his massive hands and shook his head slowly. "I am stronger now," he said, "but I can become invincible on my own. I don't need you." Riot scrambled on the ground, furious and disoriented. "Why? Why won't you let me lead? I can take the lead. I'll let you." "Because you are too weak," Kingpin cut in. There was no pity in his voice. Only calculation. Only contempt. Riot fell silent. The excuse rankled, the rejection stung, but the symbiote was a predator that adapted. It quieted, swallowed its pride, and negotiated. "You want revenge on Spider-Man, don't you?" Kingpin asked. "Come with me. I'll find you a better host. Join me, and together we'll wipe out every so-called superhero, including Spider-Man." There was command in his words, not an offer. The symbiote thought it over and agreed. With a last look of wounded pride, Riot abandoned the passerby and flung itself into another uncontrolled host. It lurched to its feet, swaying, and fell in behind Kingpin. By the time Kingpin finished his sweep of the block, every major supervillain active in the United States had been spoken for. A slow, cruel smile spread over his face as he imagined his future. The empire he would build this time would not be a hidden underworld of petty crimes. Every subordinate would be a force multiplier, beings of power far above ordinary men. Against his private army, governments, the national military, S-Healed, Hydra, the Avengers, even the Alliance of Patriots would be paper. He would not merely be a crime lord anymore. He would be the master of the world. He turned once, coolly regarding Dr. Octopus, Dr. Lizard, and the twitching form that was Riot. "We have work to do," he said. They followed in his shadow. They had no choice. The Osborne building was crowded. The main hall hummed with speculation and hope. People clustered in small groups, whispering about the experiment Mr. Norman had promised. Norman Osborne's announcement had been vague. No one knew exactly what the public test involved, and imaginations ran wild. Some thought it would be another antiseptic clinical trial. Others hoped for something impossible, a superhuman serum. From her perch above the crowd, Jessica watched the faces below, anxious, excited, greedy. She smirked. "Do you think a lot of them actually expect to be injected and come out with powers?" she asked. Uncle Ben, lounging against a nearby ledge, chuckled. "Norman didn't say what kind of test it was. People fill the gaps with what they want to hear. Super serum makes a better story than, say, a nutrition study." Jessica's ears pricked. Voices drifted up, snippets about super serum and becoming a hero. She laughed softly. They'd be hilarious if they saw the reality. "They'll find out at the final screening," Uncle Ben said, amused. Then, Jessica's eyes landed on a familiar figure below. Her face brightened. "Spider-Man," she said, delighted. "There, Parker. Go see him." Uncle Ben followed her line of sight. Peter Parker stood in the crowd, mask half on, scanning the room. There was a softness under his composed exterior. A look Ben had seen often when Peter's attention was caught by someone he cared for. Ben's mouth twitched. He could see the possibility of something more between them, and it pleased him. Jessica didn't hesitate. With a practiced flip, she dropped down and landed behind Peter with feline grace. She reached out as if to poke his shoulder, but Peter, always alert to sudden movements, turned just in time and met her with mock resignation. "Of all people," he said, almost relieved. "Why does it have to be you?" Jessica gave him a wicked grin. "Why can't it be me? Disappointed?" Peter cast a quick, worried look at the crowd. Their heads were turning. People were whispering and pointing. "Don't make yourself a spectacle," he hissed, pulling her by the wrist toward a side room. He shut the door behind them just as the first curious onlookers began to surge forward. "You're drawing attention," Peter scolded, half exasperated, half fond. "We haven't seen each other in ages, and you show up and cause problems. I don't want the lineup I worked so hard to set up to turn into chaos." Jessica curled a smile and didn't let go of his hand. "Who told you to stay in the lab all day and not see anyone?" Peter rolled his eyes, then smiled despite himself. "Maybe because I'm busy. Saving people, you know, keeps me from coming to find you." "Heh, superheroes are always busy," she teased. Peter laughed. He looked at Jessica, at Uncle Ben, and for the first time in a while, felt something like hope steady inside him. Soon, he thought, we'll stand side by side again. Soon, things might get better. They lingered, listening to the murmurs beyond the door. The world outside was changing, dangerous in new ways. But in that cramped room, Peter felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. He wasn't alone. Chapter 202, Invasion. Parker and Jessica sat together in the quiet room, talking about recent events with easy smiles. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, bathing everything in a warm golden light that made time feel suspended for a moment. "Remember that fat kid, Ned? He got into MIT. And Flash Thompson, he's going to college too. Looks like SUNY," Jessica said, her voice threaded with nostalgia. Parker's eyes flickered. SUNY. He knew it well. In the dream world, he'd spent 4 years there. His friendship and rivalry with Thompson had left a deep imprint. Hearing that Thompson was headed to the same school made something in him both relieved and anxious. If he ended up at the same college, he'd run into a lot of familiar faces. He cleared his throat and smiled, trying to hide his excitement. "Jess, with you saving the city all the time, how do you even keep track of this stuff?" Jessica grinned, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Because I'm not like you, I wouldn't even join the class group." Parker blinked, surprised. "Huh? When did the class have a group?" They stared at each other for a beat, then Jessica burst out laughing. "I thought you just didn't want to be added. Turns out you were forgotten." Sorry, I should have said something sooner. Parker chuckled and waved it off. Things like that didn't matter to him anymore. He'd stepped out of his old shadows and was building a new life. All right, enough teasing. I've got to get back to work. He stood and patted Jessica's shoulder. She raised an eyebrow and teased. Aren't you going to join it now? He hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I'll add it. He pulled out his phone and joined the class chat. Names and avatars filled the screen, familiar ghosts of a past he'd lived through. For a moment, they tugged at him, but he was no longer that naive boy. He put the phone away. Oh, by the way, Jessica added as she rose, tapping his shoulder, Thompson's coming for the experimenter screening. Keep an eye on him, okay? Parker watched her go, feeling a tangle of emotions. Thompson, he murmured with a small smile, then left the room to continue his shift. Even now, as a Sequence 8 mysterious person, he still had responsibilities. The influx of applicants for the screening meant extra hands were needed, and Parker was assigned to help people fill out forms. The sun made the hall sticky and warm, sweat pricked at his forehead, but he smiled and answered the same questions patiently, again and again. Each thank you he received, he returned with a warm smile, as if the tediousness didn't wear him down. After a while, a familiar face appeared, Thompson. He was casual and grinning, the same easy swagger Parker remembered. They clasped hands like old friends, and for a beat, the exhaustion washed away, replaced by genuine warmth. You're not surprised? Thompson asked. Parker shook his head, smiling. Jessica told me you were coming. Figured it was true. Thompson laughed. I'm a Spider-Man fan. I heard there might be a chance to meet him. Had to be here. Parker smiled at that. If he'd known Thompson admired Spider-Man that much, he thought ruefully, he could have had Uncle Ben get him a signed photo. How's work? Thompson asked. Not bad, Parker said lightly. Good. Thompson nodded. I got into a state school. What about you? Are you going to college? Want to come to SUNY with me? The offer was hopeful, earnest. Thompson wanted to spend college with him, to keep their history alive. Parker inhaled slowly. He felt torn. The pull of a normal life, of studying, was strong, but he'd learned the cost of choices in the dream life. He had responsibilities now. He needed to work, to help his family. So he shook his head. Thompson's expression softened with a mix of pride and regret. I get it, he said, patting Parker's shoulder. Whatever you choose, I've got your back. Thanks, Thompson, Parker said quietly, gratitude in his voice. No problem. We're friends, right? Thompson grinned, and they shook hands. All right, fill this out and go line up there. See you later. Parker watched Thompson leave, then returned to his duties. As evening fell, the lobby of the Osborne building emptied, and the lights took on a lonely glow. Footsteps and whispers echoed in the sparsely populated hall. Thompson finished his medical and was told to go home and wait for results. He was tired but polite, and they set a time to have dinner together. When the building finally quieted and Parker rose to leave, every muscle in his body ached. He was about to pack up when two blinding beams of light cut across the entrance, forcing him to shield his eyes. A black luxury car, its metal gleaming, smashed straight through the glass doors. The impact shattered the facade. Glass rained down, and the car screeched to a stop in the center of the hall. Women screamed, people scattered, the place erupted into chaos. Parker's danger sense flared. He stared as the passenger door creaked open, and a cold draft rolled in. 4 figures climbed out. The first was a hulking, green-scaled man with a long tail, the lizard, his eyes savage and animalistic. The second wore a white coat, 4 gleaming mechanical tentacles fanning out from his back, Dr. Octopus, an unsettling smile on his face. The third seemed human at first glance, but a silver-gray sheen crawled over him, and in an instant, he warped into a monstrous, almost 3-meter-tall form, the symbiote Riot. The last was tall, composed, and chillingly confident. His cold, sharp gaze swept the room. Jin Bing, Parker realized, sat back as if this scene was exactly what he'd come for. Dr. Lizard? Dr. Octopus? Parker's heart hammered. He'd seen them in the news, villains who'd once crossed paths with Uncle Ben. The other two must be just as dangerous. He was not mistaken. Jin Bing and his allies had chosen this site for maximum chaos. There wasn't much of a plan beyond making a spectacle, luring enemies in and killing them. Then let's begin, Jin Bing said in a low voice, every syllable carrying authority. Riot snorted and snapped into motion, a bloodthirsty gleam in his eyes. His body slicked with silver-gray ooze as he transformed into a towering monster, roaring and sprinting toward the walls. He paused, nose twitching. He detected other symbiotes in the building. Venom and two more were here, he realized, and he moved to find them. Screams filled the hall again, as people fled in every direction, tripping over one another to escape the horror. Lizard lashed out with his tail, smashing a massive pillar and charging into the panicked crowd with brutal force. Dr. Octopus glanced up, his mechanical limbs thrashing as they carried him toward the upper floors. He was heading for the labs to hunt for whatever rare elements he needed. Jin Bing, meanwhile, simply shoved a chair over and sat down, watching with a detached air, as though the violence satisfied some calculated purpose. Parker forced himself to breathe. He knew he didn't have the strength to take these villains on alone. Not now. He looked frantically around the hall for anything he could use, any angle, any tool that might give him a chance, but the odds were clear. Lizard rampaging, Octavius in the labs riot-hunting symbiotes, and Jin Bing watching it all unfold. Parker felt the weight of the moment. He needed a plan, and fast. Chapter 203, Chaos. The building had dissolved into chaos. Shrill screams and desperate cries tore through the air like a silent earthquake, fraying everyone's nerves. People shoved and stumbled for the exits. Some fell and were immediately trampled by the panicked crowd. Groans of pain and terrified shouts braided into a single, volatile roar. The security captain went pale. He jabbed at the alarm and the piercing siren filled the halls. He barked orders into his radio, drew his pistol, and though his hands trembled, his eyes were iron steady. He trained his weapon on Dr. Lizard and squeezed the trigger. Bullets hissed through the air, only to spark and ping off the green scales as if he'd shot at metal. Dr. Lizard grinned, razor teeth flashing and a bloodthirsty light in his eyes. In a blur, he melted into the crowd. His massive tail lashed out like a whip, sending several people flying. Claws glinted and left bloody rips wherever they struck. Panic rippled outward, faces contorted with fear and despair as people scattered. Parker stood to the side, watching. Responsibility weighed on him, heavier than fear. He had to act. Hesitation meant more injured, or worse. "Everyone, this way, come with me, quickly," he shouted. His voice cut through the panic. A number of people heard and rallied to him. He fumbled his pass from his pocket, swiped the lock on the nearest emergency door, and frantically motioned for the group to go through. His heart hammered and sweat slicked his palms, but he forced himself to remain calm. Of course, the crowd drew attention. Dr. Lizard's eyes locked onto them like a predator onto prey. He advanced with a lazy, cruel smile that pressed on Parker's chest like a physical weight. Parker swallowed. "Go on. I'll lead him away," he told the people near him, voice steady. Gratitude and worry flitted across their faces, but they didn't hesitate. They slipped through the doorway as Parker faced Dr. Lizard, a hard, determined light in his eyes. "Hey, Lizard," Parker taunted. "Don't you dare come after me." The green man paused and sneered. "Boy, are you looking for death?" he hissed, then lunged. His speed blurred, so fast Parker barely saw him move. Parker's feet left the ground. He didn't run away in cowardice, he ran to buy time. He darted toward another passage, feeling the lizard's breath close to his neck. Each look back showed those murderous eyes, promising to tear him apart. A storage room loomed ahead. Parker dove inside, slammed the door, and held his breath. The room was dark and musty, crammed with boxes and old equipment. He braced himself against the door, mind racing for a plan. Footsteps pounded his resolve thin. Dr. Lizard had found him. Parker counted possibilities, discarded most of them. The door took the first blow and dented. A second, and the frame cracked. With a final, furious slam, it gave way. Dr. Lizard filled the doorway, cold eyes glittering in the dim light, a sneer playing at his lips. Parker raised his hands slowly, desperation in his voice. "Please, let me help you. I can make an antidote. I can turn you back. Believe me." The lizard laughed, a short, contemptuous sound. "Why would I go back to being some soft-hearted human?" His muscles tensed beneath green scales. "I'm fine like this." He bared his claws. "Look, I'll make you like me." Parker's heart seized. He knew direct combat was suicide. Then, like a streak of shadow, a small figure flashed beside Dr. Lizard, and a compact fist slammed into the beast, sending him tumbling through a row of shelving. "Jessica!" Parker breathed. She didn't wait. "What are you doing? Run!" she snapped, grabbing Parker and hauling him toward the exit. No sooner had they cleared the storage room than the structure behind them detonated in a thunderous blast. Debris flew as Dr. Lizard hauled himself free of the wreckage and roared, a sound that seemed to shake the building's bones, then streaked after them. "Don't even think about escaping," his voice boomed down the corridor. Jessica shoved Parker into the hallway, planted her feet, and turned to face the passage. Her jaw was set. "Parker, go! I'll hold him." Parker took 2 hesitant steps. "Where's Spider-Man?" he asked, panic and hope tangled together, an odd question that made his throat tighten. The noise upstairs had sounded like a brutal fight. The one person he prayed was on the other side might be caught up in it. Before Jessica could answer, Dr. Lizard burst from a side door with inhuman speed. She sidestepped narrowly and shoved Parker again. "Go, now!" Parker wanted to stay. He didn't want to leave her alone, but he knew staying would only make him a liability. He started to turn and run, then froze. A knot of newly mutated figures was blocking the main exit. Those scratched by Dr. Lizard's claws were changing right before his eyes, scales sprouting, mouths flattening into snouts. They moved with jerky, animal eagerness and converged like a hunting pack. In the dream world, he didn't have this ability? Parker murmured, unsettled. Adrenaline sharpened him. He snatched a shard of broken glass from the floor and tossed it at the nearest lizard man. It shattered with a bright, ringing crack, drawing their attention. "Hey, you idiots, come and catch me," he taunted. It worked. The lizardman lunged for Parker, and he seized the chance to sprint. "Watch out for his claws," he called back to Jessica. "Parker." Jessica's voice cracked with worry. She tracked his retreating form, praying he would get away. Her attention snapped back as Dr. Lizard barked an order, his laugh full of savage pride. "Turn into lizardmen and be my loyal soldiers," he crowed. Jessica's teeth showed. "Ugly lizard," she spat. "We'll see who wins." Parker barreled down the stairwell, footsteps echoing off cold concrete. A dozen lizardmen chased him, relentless, red-rimmed eyes blank with single-minded hunger. He dodged their strikes with the quick, preternatural reflexes that had kept him alive. When one lunged, he pivoted and drove a fist into its chest, sending it spinning. "Humph," he panted. "If I can't beat the big lizard, I'll take on his little ones." Meanwhile, Uncle Ben stood his ground on the other side of the building, blocking Riot and Dr. Octopus. The building's alarm had sounded, and everyone moved into role by instinct. Jessica to hold Dr. Lizard, Uncle Ben to stall Riot and Doc Ock. They didn't have to win, only buy time for reinforcements and get people out alive. Uncle Ben braced himself, unflinching despite the odds. "You two, come together, or one at a time?" he asked, voice steady. Riot laughed, a harsh, joyless sound. "I'll take you on by myself," he snarled and charged. A raging fire burned in Riot's core. Anger and the hunger for revenge crashed through him like a flood, electrifying every fiber of his being. His silver-gray liquid form gleamed with a terrible luster as he fixed his gaze on the one figure he'd come for, Uncle Ben. Ben was the man who had ruined Riot's plan before. It was because of him that Riot and his allies had failed. The shame of that failure had never left Riot, and now the chance to settle the score had finally come. There would be no repeat of the past. Riot's muscles tensed. He surged forward with lightning speed, intent on crushing every obstacle between him and his goal. Defeat Uncle Ben, reclaim his 2 missing subordinates, and erase that old humiliation. Dr. Octopus watched from the side with a cold, calculating stillness. His 4 mechanical tentacles clicked against each other as his eyes flicked between Riot and Uncle Ben. Let them tear each other apart, he thought. Their battle would distract everyone while he took what he came for. Doc Ock's gaze turned to the elevator doors. With a brutal flick of his arms, the tentacles ripped the doors aside, metal shrieking. He intended to climb through the elevator shaft and up to the laboratory above, the heart of his plan. But before he could move into the shaft, a silver-white web shot out from the side and snared the opening, halting him. "Spider-Man!" Doc Ock spat, a flash of contempt crossing his face. Above them, Uncle Ben hung from the ceiling like a spider, nimbly dodging Riot's strikes. His voice, low and steady, carried certainty. "You're not getting past here." Riot's rage flared. He clenched his fists and lunged again, all speed and brutality. Doc Ock sneered and sent his tentacles whipping toward Uncle Ben with a cold, cutting wind. "Then go to hell," Doc Ock said. Boom. The clash of powers exploded outward, tearing the surrounding floor into rubble in an instant. Down in the stairwell, Peter Parker stood panting, surrounded by the lizard creatures he'd just taken down. Pride warmed him. This was the most he'd ever handled on his own. For a few breathless moments, he felt like a fighter, not the kid who always needed help. Then the building trembled again. His smile vanished. Fear tightened inside him. If Uncle Ben and Jessica were locked in a deadly fight upstairs, he couldn't sit this out. "I can't let them face this alone," he told himself. Determination and anxiety mixed in his chest. He needed to help, but the truth was stark. He was nearly spent. The enemies upstairs were powerful. He couldn't beat them in his current state, unless he got stronger. The only thing in the building that could change that was the superhuman serum. Peter's eyes darted around. Then he remembered. Since being promoted to a Sequence 8 gold digger, he'd gained 2 new active skills. One of them was the ability to sense valuable objects nearby. Superhuman serum had to be valuable. He'd try. He closed his eyes and murmured the familiar invocation of the treasure hunting skill. A multicolored map bloomed behind his lids, dotted with points of light, some bright, some dim, each giving off a different aura. He noticed a blue light that matched the same feel as Uncle Ben's power. Nearby, he could pick out 2 figures, probably the enemies fighting upstairs. A black spot at the bottom matched the signature he knew for Jessica, and another close to it fit Dr. Lizard. 2 lights were especially strong. One seethed with an overwhelmingly domineering force. Riot, he guessed. The other was powerful and oddly familiar, but not Uncle Ben. Peter couldn't place it. Time was pressing. He focused away from the big, threatening signals and searched for anything that might be the serum. Then he saw it, a small, warm light not far from him, radiating familiarity. It pulled at him like a memory. He crept through the building, light-footed and alert, following the glow through a long corridor and up a few flights. The lights in his mind flickered like a guide. When he reached the door to the lab where the glow had led him, he found himself staring at a newly installed laboratory. Something he'd only ever heard about, a place for studying extraterrestrial life. He pushed the door open and walked in, but the room was empty. The feeling that had drawn him deeper remained, though, and led him to the farthest end of the lab. There, under dim lighting and inside a transparent containment unit, sat a pool of writhing black slime. "Hiss! So it's really you," Peter breathed. The sight of it set his teeth on edge. He knew this thing. In his dreams, those terrible visions, he'd been consumed by it before. Venom. Being bonded with that thing had changed him in ways he still wanted to forget. The memories were like a scar, raw, humiliating, frightening. The black mass slithered up the glass and reshaped into a grim, snarling head. 2 slitted white eyes fixed on Peter with an almost frantic hunger. "You open the lid," Venom rasped. Its voice was rough and urgent. There was something almost adoring in the way it stared at him. "Let me out." Peter's heart hammered. The power Venom offered would be enormous, enough to turn the tide of a desperate fight, but the cost was terrifying. He remembered the darker urges, the loss of control, the shame. He thought of Uncle Ben and Jessica fighting upstairs and imagined them being overwhelmed. He didn't have time to play at perfection. The building shook again. Whatever was happening above could tip any second. "All right," Peter said, swallowing hard. "I need your power." Venom's eagerness was palpable. Peter slid his hand to the latch and with trembling fingers opened the containment. The lid rose slowly. Before Peter could take a step back, the black mass leapt out like a stallion released from reins and wrapped itself around him. Power poured through him, electric, intoxicating. Every nerve sang. His muscles filled with strength, and somewhere under the rush came a darker whisper. "Parker," Venom's voice echoed inside his head, proud and hungry. "We meet again." Peter forced himself to stay clear-headed. He clenched his fists and let the strength flow into him, even as he braced against the invasive thoughts. Confidence swelled, almost godlike. He felt more potent than he had in those nightmare visions. "Fine," Peter muttered. "I need your power right now." "Take it," Venom replied, greedily. Black tendrils spilled from Peter like liquid night, wrapping and hardening into a living suit. The new armor resembled a spider's silhouette, sleek and black, trimmed in white webbing patterns, a stark white spider emblazoned across the chest. The mask's eyes were blank white slits. The whole person seemed to hum with an ominous alien energy. Peter flexed his hands and, for the first time in this place, smiled an ugly, fierce grin. Now I'm Venom Spider-Man. Chapter 205. Venom Spider-Man. On the top floor of the Osborn building, in the Superman Serum Laboratory, the lights were bright and clinical, and the air smelled sharply of disinfectant. This was Norman Osborn's secret experimental base. The walls were plastered with complex chemical formulas and anatomical diagrams. Data scrolled perpetually across the displays. Scientists in white coats moved through the room with practiced efficiency, every face taut with concentration. Norman Osborn stood at the center of it all, tall and immovable, his gaze fixed through the thick bulletproof glass on the operating table beyond. He was the soul of this place, and the one who had set everything in motion. Below the glass, a young man lay still, his body scarred and burned as if by some terrible calamity, yet his face remained oddly composed. Above him, caught beneath a sealed dome, a pool of blood-red mucus writhed slowly as if alive. Norman allowed a faint smile. The moment the symbiote had successfully bonded with Peter Parker, something in him shifted. Venom, he thought, watching the slick mass. Whether you seize this chance is up to you. A small cough by his side broke his reverie. Dr. Allen, head of the Symbiote Project, hovered near with a mix of anxiety and awe. "Chairman," he said, voice trembling, "everything's ready. Shall we begin?" Norman nodded once and turned his attention back to the table. The glass dome began to hiss and lift. The red mucus poured out like living shadow, eager and hungry, and reached for the young man. He convulsed violently the moment it touched him. Calm dissolved into pain as the symbiote crept over skin and into flesh. The scientists tightened their grips on instruments. Only Norman kept his expression composed. Then the young man snapped his eyes open. They blazed red. A moment later, a concussive blast ripped through the building. Somewhere nearby, a door was blown outward. Uncle Ben slammed back like an arrow, colliding with a wall. The impact cracked plaster and sent debris and dust into the air. Thick smoke curled through the corridor. Several workers, terrified by the sudden violence, screamed and cowered in a corner, hands clamped over ears. Ben struggled to his feet, pain radiating through his body. His vision swam and his ears rang, but he knew the danger wasn't over. He rolled aside just in time for a mechanical tentacle to lance through the smoke where he'd been standing, a metallic serpent that gouged deep into the floor with a shriek of metal. At the same instant, a silver-gray meteor hammer hurtled through the haze and struck him. Ben raised his arms to block, but the force jolted through him. Blood edged his mouth. As the smoke thinned, two figures emerged from the dust and light. Dr. Octopus and Riot. Dr. Octopus's mechanical appendages clicked and swung with precise menace, while Riot, a living weapon of a symbiote, flowed and reformed into cold, slashing armaments. "Spider-Man," Riot snarled, voice cruel and mechanical. "Today you die." Ben, battered and breathless, forced himself upright. His body felt spent, but his voice was stubborn. "You think this is enough to kill me?" he rasped. Riot sneered, "Stubborn until the end." His arms remade into massive dual axes, and he advanced, each step making the air itself seem heavier. Dr. Octopus glanced past Ben with a dismissive flick. He hadn't come here for a drawn-out fight. A badly wounded Spider-Man, he figured, would be easy to finish. Ben felt his world tilt. He could barely see now. Limbs heavy, he closed his eyes and thought of May, of Peter. If this was the end, Riot raised his axes and brought them down. A black tendril pierced the shattered glass of a nearby window and seized Ben, dragging him out of the swing with stupendous force. The axe smashed into the floor with a thunderous crash, splinters and dust erupting in its wake. A figure in a pitch-black spider suit dropped through the hole and landed between Ben and his attackers, placing Ben gently on the ground. Ben stared at the newcomer. Bewilderment and recognition warred across his face. "Venom?" he managed, incredulous. "It can't be." The figure chuckled, the voice unmistakably familiar and warm. "I'm Venom Spider-Man. Relax, leave him to me." "Venom Spider-Man?" Ben blinked, still trying to reconcile what he was seeing. "Did Mr. Norman find you a host?" The black-suited figure huffed, visibly annoyed. "No, I found my host on my own, Ben. I don't need anyone." Before Ben could press further, a quieter voice, low and under control, cut in. Peter Parker stepped forward from under the symbiote's presence, but he didn't reveal himself. He had not decided whether to tell Ben his identity. "Venom," Peter said, terse and focused. "Save the talk. Be ready. Can't you smell Riot?" Riot roared at the sight, and the two symbiotes instantly sensed one another. The air cleared as Riot whipped up a gust of motion, revealing the black-suited figure and Uncle Ben in full view. "Venom!" Riot spat. "How dare you show yourself here?" "Riot, you're already a failure," Venom retorted. "Today I'll finish you. Kill you here, and I won't be a failure." Riot replied, and launched itself at them like a missile. Everyone froze as Venom sprang into action. Two black threads of web shot from the newcomer's wrists and struck Riot mid-leap, knotted and tightened. Riot hung there, stunned, as the shooter yanked it down and slammed a fist. The blow sent Riot careening some distance back, tumbling past Dr. Octopus, who had been ready to withdraw. Ben's stunned expression finally broke into dawning comprehension. "You," he whispered, "you're Spider-Man?" The man in the black suit, Peter, bonded with Venom, didn't answer with words. He moved. The symbiote lent him strength and speed beyond normal limits. Black tendrils lashed and struck with brutal precision. Each strike landed with a purpose that was far more ruthless than the old Peter Parker's style. This was power that had learned to enjoy itself. Dr. Octopus bristled and spun his mechanical arms into a defensive formation. "A new Spider-Man?" he scoffed, testing the enemy. "What can you possibly do that will change anything?" Peter's response was movement. He surged forward, black tentacles whirling like living whips. Every attack from Doc Ock and Riot met steel and shadow and was systematically repelled. The room filled with the metallic ring of clutching metal and the wet thunk of bodies hitting concrete. The symbiote-enhanced Parker was a blur of focused aggression. He wrapped a tendril around one of Doc Ock's arms and, with a powerful wrench, yanked the mechanical limb and its controller off balance. Doc Ock crashed to the ground. With his other hand, Parker launched a strike that knocked Riot sprawling. The two once confident attackers found themselves driven back by a single, relentless figure. Ben watched in shocked relief and, finally, genuine joy. The battered man he had feared to lose had a new guardian, one who might be powerful enough to stand against the dangers that stalked them all. Chapter 206: Victory or Loss. The hall thrummed with tension as Jessica and the lizard fought a life-or-death battle. Sweat beaded along Jessica's brow, but her gaze was unnervingly steady. She moved like a cat through the wrecked room, dodging, weaving, striking when she could. Her blows did little more than chip at the creature's thick scales, but she didn't relent. The lizard roared and lashed with a heavy tail and razor claws, each strike shuddering the floor beneath them. Jessica relied on nimble footwork to slip out of range, each dodge growing more precise as her energy drained. She shortened her steps, measured her breath, and treated each movement like a dance with death. Part of her mind, though, remained fixed on the tall, immobile man sitting like a statue in the hall. His eyes were ice. Her instinct told her he was more dangerous than the lizard. "Stop hiding and come out!" The lizard bellowed, rage quickening his voice. Jessica laughed, a flash of defiance on her face. "Ha-ha, clumsy lizard, who said you were graceful?" She taunted him, darted aside, and drew another roar. Then the ceiling cracked with a thunderous sound. Two figures crashed down through the plaster, one black, one silver-gray, tangled together as they fell. It was Venom and Spider-Man, and the silver figure was Riot. They landed fighting, a tornado of motion that tore up more of the hall. Parker's Spider-Man was lithe and serpentine, every punch and kick precise and full of force. Riot answered like a rampaging beast, brutal and relentless, ripping through pillars and smashing decorations. Every impact felt like another blow to Jessica's chest. She backed away, unwilling to get swept up in that kind of combat. She didn't have the strength to join such an extraordinary clash. All she could do was watch, fists clenched, nails digging into her palms with a mixture of frustration and helplessness. Kingpin, however, remained motionless, eyes still closed, as if nothing around him mattered. The corner of his mouth twitched only once, almost imperceptible, like someone following an argument with idle curiosity. The Parker-Venom pairing unleashed far more power than Riot could match. With Octavius's help, Riot might have held his own once, but alone he was outclassed. Parker grabbed Riot by the back of the head, yanked him off his host, and held the writhing silver-gray mass in his hand. "Heh, Riot, you lose again," Venom crowed triumphantly through Spider-Man. Riot struggled, spitting fury. "I don't accept this. If I had a perfect host, I'd be stronger than you. How could you get such a strong host, you idiot?" "Not happening," Parker sneered, amusement and provocation in his voice. Then, without warning, he hurled Riot toward the lizard. "How about this host, strong enough?" "What are you doing?" Jessica cried, stunned and angry. "Parker, that's completely unnecessary." Venom was alarmed too. They'd just beaten Riot. Why let him go and toss him onto the lizard? The symbiote murmured an anxious, "What if?" Parker waved it off. "Nothing's gonna happen. Together we're unbeatable." Venom, caught up in Parker's confidence, answered, "Yeah, we're invincible." Their self-assurance didn't have time to settle. Riot hit the lizard, and the silver-gray mass spread over his scales like creeping oil. In moments, Riot had reasserted itself, fusing with the lizard's body. A voice, Riot's voice, thundered from the creature with arrogance and rage. "Ha, Parker! You'll pay for that!" Parker's expression tightened. For a heartbeat, his confidence wavered, but he steadied himself and faced the new combination with resolve. "Venom, let's take him down, together!" "Right," Venom replied, the fighting spirit back in his tone. They charged the Riot Lizard hybrid, and the hall filled with the roar of combat once more. Every impact sounded like a countdown. Jessica could only stand to the side, worry coiling in her chest, praying the fight would resolve in their favor. Kingpin remained composed, eyes still mostly closed, though now there was a rare, slow twitch at the corner of one lid, a sign he was at least aware. Before the battle reached a conclusion, piercing sirens wailed outside. Police were finally here. Jessica inhaled a small, relieved breath. These weren't just any officers. The support had been summoned by Mr. Norman. She eased slightly but kept watching. A voice cut through the chaos at the doorway, carrying a showy, mocking tone. "Wow, lively place. Is this a party? Mind if I join?" Jessica's heart skipped. A figure flew in and landed in the doorway in unmistakable red and gold armor. Iron Man. Kingpin's stillness broke. His eyes opened. He rose with deliberate, unhurried power and turned toward the entrance. His gaze was razor-sharp, but rather than looking at Iron Man, he smiled at the man in the black combat suit standing nearby. "Long time no see, Matt," Kingpin said. Daredevil, Matt, stiffened. His calm mask cracked. He ground his teeth so hard it sounded like it hurt. "You're not dead yet, Kingpin," he spat, years of hatred packed into those words. The air between them tightened, as if a new fight were about to explode. Tony watched the exchange, the complicated lines of his expression visible even beneath the helmet. He leaned closer and murmured to Matt, "Be careful. He isn't someone to take lightly." Matt nodded, but his focus never left Kingpin. This man had been his most dangerous, most personal enemy. Kingpin's smile faded. He walked toward Matt with a slow, measured confidence that carried the weight of someone who believed victory was inevitable. "You think you can beat me, Matt?" he asked, his voice low and heavy. "I'm not the same," Matt said, fists clenched, eyes hard with resolve. Kingpin sneered, sweeping his gaze over everyone in the hall like a judge looking at a courtroom of fools. "No, you still don't understand. Today I'll show you real power." At once, a fierce, almost tangible aura burst out from Kingpin, sweeping across the building. It was a presence that made people unsteady, a weight of will that filled the room. Far off in Washington, Pierce, the former S.H.I.E.L.D. director, answered the news on his end and chuckled into the phone. "Time to close the net," he said, hanging up without hiding his smile. He stared out the window and whispered to himself, "Fury, without Iron Man and Daredevil to protect you, you've got no power to stop this. This time, you lose." Chapter 207, Undercurrent. Pierce stood in his spacious office, the city's lights spreading out below him through floor-to-ceiling windows. His gaze was cold and steady. Everything in his world seemed under control. The night cloaked the city in glittering darkness, but beneath that glamorous facade, currents churned and danger lurked. He hadn't planned to move so soon. He knew timing was everything. But then Banner appeared, and with him came an unprecedented sense of urgency. If Banner, so powerful, were truly under Fury's control, it would be disastrous for Hydra. A few days ago, Pierce had received a terse intelligence report. Banner had been badly wounded in a battle with Godzilla. The news had shocked him, but it also made him smile. An injured Banner couldn't bring his full strength to bear. That made him an opportunity. Pierce had to act quickly. He'd sent a stooge to stir up trouble with Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, knowing Fisk would not tolerate provocation. As expected, Fisk took the bait and led his men to the Osborn building. Norman Osborn would have no choice but to call S.H.I.E.L.D. for protection. Fury, who was always eager to assert himself and win influence with the Patriot Alliance, would be forced to commit against Osborn, and that would thin the forces he could use elsewhere. Pierce watched the chessboard at his feet and felt a swell of satisfaction. He pictured Fury's panicked face, imagined S.H.I.E.L.D. in turmoil, imagined himself pulling the strings. He turned from the window, lifted a glass of red wine, and rolled it gently. The rippling liquid looked to him like the taste of victory. Still, he wasn't complacent. Even wounded, Banner remained a dangerous asset. Capturing him would be a major coup for Hydra. A hard glint passed through Pierce's eyes. He needed to win. "Fury, you can hide in S.H.I.E.L.D. all you like," Pierce murmured to the empty office. "But every shelter has an owner. This is my S.H.I.E.L.D. now." S.H.I.E.L.D. Headquarters. Nick Fury stood before the big windows, the city's darkness pressing in like a curtain. Street lamps flared here and there, struggling through the night. Fury's mood matched the sky, heavy and taut with tension. He was director. His instincts had kept him alive. Tonight, those instincts screamed that something was coming, something patient and feral. "Who will bite first at this bait?" he muttered, watching the city. "I hope it's not what I think." The phone cut through the silence. Fury answered with the same flat, gravelly calm he always used. "Fury." A voice on the line had him frown. "What did you say?" "Carter wants to see me, at her place." Peggy Carter. Fury's jaw tightened. Peggy did not summon him unless it was important. That alone made the call a warning bell. Maybe it was genuine. Maybe it was a lure. Either way, Fury had to see for himself. He would not hand over a detail to chance. "Fine, make the arrangements. I'll be there." As he set the phone down, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe this was meant to draw him away from headquarters. He snorted under his breath. "Let's see who has the better hand tonight." He gathered his gear, checked it twice, and left. 3 black vehicles rolled out of S.H.I.E.L.D. 10 minutes later, carrying Fury and a dozen agents toward Peggy Carter's home. Back at headquarters, commanders tracked the convoy on the big screen. 3 vehicles, 14 personnel. Expected arrival at the rendezvous point in 10 minutes. Be ready. A taut voice filled the operations room. The convoy moved through tree-lined streets. Sunlight peeked through leaves, throwing the road into dappled shadows. Fury sat stone-faced, replaying possibilities in his head. Then 2 enormous trucks loomed out of a side road and boxed them in. Trucks before them and behind them turned to form a steel trap. The agents reacted instantly. Windows dropped, sidearms came free, and they fired for the truck's tires. The truck's drivers, however, were ready. They leapt clear, and the massive rig surged on, unpiloted and unstoppable. 2 trucks cannoned into the convoy. Fury's driver swerved. He and his vehicle escaped, but the 2 cars behind weren't so lucky. One was smashed under an overturning trailer and erupted in flame. Men were thrown clear, screams cut the air, and automatic weapons began spitting from the roadside. "Take cover!" Fury barked. They used the cars for shields and scrambled for better cover. Fury dove behind a boulder and began calling targets with precise, hard orders. Bullets stitched the air and metal pinged off the vehicles. The firefight sharpened into a brutal, chaotic ballet. Out of the trees roared a trio of black motorcycles. Riders in dark leathers blasted toward them, sidearms raised. One rider fired. The bullet grazed Fury's shoulder with stinging heat. He rolled and returned fire, but the rider tried to close in for a kill. Just as the bike was about to mow him down, a rocket slammed into it. An explosion sent the motorcycle and rider flying. Fury slammed into the ground, ears ringing, vision splitting at the edges. Through the smoke came an armored S.H.I.E.L.D. vehicle with the agency's emblem painted on its flank. Men poured out with heavy weapons and joined the fight. For a moment, Fury allowed himself to hope. Then the men he thought were reinforcements swung on their former comrades. Guns clicked to new shoulders. "Sorry, Chief," one of them said, his voice oddly small against the spray of gunfire. They opened up. Fury watched in stunned disbelief as agents he had trusted fell. The road filled with the thud of bodies and blood. Fury's chest clenched. This was not a simple ambush. The enemy had been inside S shield all along. Of course we were breached, Fury growled. Of course. As the attackers closed in, a sound split the air like a tearing sky. A Quinjet appeared through a break in the clouds, ghosting down over the battle. Fury felt a flicker of relief. The enemy commander raised his head at the sight and went pale. He'd believed all Quinjets at headquarters compromised. The Quinjet broke the night that had knotted around Fury. Turrets opened, and a hail of artillery raked the enemy positions, explosions shredding trees and scattering the ambushers. Men fell back in disarray as fire rained down. Inside the cockpit, Agent May worked with cool, ruthless efficiency. Her hands were a blur over the controls, her eyes cold and concentrated. She knew the margin for error was slim. Every second mattered. She'd been waiting. Hydra had overlooked the Quinjet based in Wakanda. May had kept it hidden and had been ready to return when Fury needed it most. "Get out now!" Her voice crackled over Fury's comm. Fury rose from behind the boulder and took stock. The burst of air support had bought them time, but he knew the enemy would regroup. He moved like a man on a wire, fast, decisive. "May, cover me," he said. She leveled the weapons and kept the suppression tight. Fury slipped from cover and sprinted toward an alley. Bullets stitched the asphalt around him. Two figures in the distance ran like animals, too fast for ordinary men. May's voice came again, sharper this time. "Chief, we have to pull back. It's not safe." Fury darted into the alley and didn't stop until he hit temporary cover. He sucked in ragged breaths and looked back at the street through smoke and flame. May was keeping the sky full of death for anyone who tried to follow. Over Fury's earpiece, May muttered, a chill in her tone, "They move like they're enhanced. Chief, did they get serum injections too?" Fury's jaw tightened. Hydra's reach had teeth. They weren't just attacking, they were changing the rules of the fight. He wiped the grit from his mouth and set his shoulders. The rescue had come just in time, but the undercurrent running through the night was clear and cold. The real battle had only just begun. Chapter 208, Fierce Battle. Pierce had pulled out all the stops to eliminate Nick Fury. He flooded the area with operatives and sent 5 Hydra agents injected with a superhuman serum. Fighters Pierce insisted were stronger and faster than Captain America. Under the cover of the bunker, those enhanced agents cut through the hail of bullets with ease and stalked Fury, every step measured, every motion cold and efficient. They moved like predators, narrowing in on prey. Fury glanced back, but did not slow down. He couldn't afford hesitating for even a second. The lead agent closed to pistol range and squeezed the trigger. An arrow suddenly zipped in from above, struck the pistol, and detonated in an eruption of flame. The blast hurled the agent backward. The shooters looked up to see a man on a rooftop, broad-shouldered, bow in hand, eyes sharp as an eagle's. "Nice shot, Barton," Fury called, relief softening his voice. "Looks like your archery hasn't rusted over." Hawkeye, Clint Barton, smiled, light and confident. "Been on vacation long enough to get rusty, Director," he teased. "Wouldn't want you to fire me." Barton's arrows fell in a precise, deadly rain. They disrupted the super agent's advance and bought Fury precious seconds. Fury cut into a narrow, hidden alley while Barton picked off pursuers from above. Word had it Barton had been treated in Wakanda and returned to the field with Agent May. His presence was a fresh, vital advantage. Barton wasn't just an excellent marksman, he was one of Fury's most trusted allies. Together, Fury and Barton moved like a single, rehearsed unit. They ran through the alley, gravel and trash scattering underfoot. Fury led, gun ready. Barton covered the rear, bow taut. Suddenly, a hulking figure lunged from the shadows, brandishing a massive battle axe. Fury fired, but the rounds pinged harmlessly off a vest that seemed as tough as steel. Fury cursed under his breath and backed away. The axe's arc whistled toward his head. Barton vaulted to a high wall, crouched, drew an explosive-tipped arrow and aimed at the axe. The arrow sailed true, struck the weapon, and detonated. The axe shattered into fragments. The super agent was thrown off balance. Fury seized the opening and ran. They broke out of the alley into an open patch of ground where the Quinjet hovered, silhouetted, massive, its rotors stirring dust and leaves. Agent May shouted from the open ramp. "Hurry, go, get on first," Barton said. He pulled explosive arrows from his quiver, turned to face the incoming pursuit, and began firing. Each blast pushed the enemies back with heavy shock waves. Fury sprinted to the jet and looked back. "Barton, get on!" he shouted. Barton fired one last explosive arrow, then sprinted for the ramp. A dark shadow lunged at him from the side. Without missing a beat, Barton drove a regular arrow into the attacker, bringing it down long enough to leap aboard. May slammed the hatch shut. Engines bellowed as the Quinjet lifted away. Inside, Fury and Barton exchanged a rare smile and a relieved breath. Fury clapped a hand on Barton's shoulder. "Nice work. Welcome back." Clint returned the smile, quieter. "I'm back, Director." The fighting inside the Osborne building was smaller in scale, but no less intense. The air felt scorched by the violence, each collision booming like thunder. Matt Murdock stood before Wilson Fisk, the kingpin, rage and pain burning in him. He still remembered the helplessness of that first crushing night against Fisk, the memory fueling every strike now. He drew his batons, eyes blazing, and charged. Fisk merely chuckled, an almost contemptuous sound. He took Matt's blows without moving, a living, immovable mountain. Matt could feel his arms trembling, sweat slicked his palms. No matter how much stronger he'd become, Fisk did not budge. "You're stronger," Fisk said, lips curling, "but not enough. 50%? No, 40 will do." He braced himself and smiled with malice. "Let me show you real strength." Fisk's body surged. Muscles bulged, his white suit shredded into fragments like confetti. A raw, tremendous force rolled outward from him, sweeping the room with the pressure of a storm. The air crackled. Everyone felt it. Tony Stark hovering in his armor, Jessica watching from the sidelines, Peter Parker tangled with a venomous presence, and Dr. Riot Lizard clashing nearby. All turned toward Fisk with horror. Fisk's aura slammed into the space like a tidal wave. It was hard to breathe. Even Tony, encased in the Iron Man suit, felt a weight he had never before experienced. Matt felt anger, shame, and a small, sharp fear, but he couldn't step back. He had to stand against Fisk. "Take this, Matt," Fisk snarled and threw a fist. The wind from the blow howled past them. The gusts smashed through a glass door and toppled police cars outside as if the world itself were being twisted. Tony rocketed in, slammed into Matt, and knocked him aside, his timing the difference between life and death. "Thanks," Matt gasped, rubbing his shoulder. "I'm a consultant for S.H.I.E.L.D. now," Tony replied dryly through the suit, then shifted into strategy mode. He scanned Fisk, calculating. "He's strong, but not invincible. My armor brings firepower and defense. You bring agility. We can do this if we work together." Matt nodded, gripping his batons tighter. He understood the only hope lay in cooperation. Fisk's gaze flicked to Tony, cold as a blade. "Iron Man, Tony Stark, thank you," he said slowly. "It was because of your kidnapping that I gained this incomparable power." Tony's laugh was a brittle thing. He didn't remember Fisk's supposed role in his past mistakes. He'd been consumed by building suits, not the intrigues around him. "Oh, really? You're welcome," Tony said, with a half smirk betraying little concern and a readiness for the fight to come. Fisk's stare hardened. "To repay you, I'll let you die with your head attached. I'll be merciful." His voice was a promise of violence. Then he began to stride forward. Each step shook the floor like the approach of a giant. On the outskirts of the melee, Peter Parker was wrestling with the voice in his head, Venom, which whispered and snarked and pushed. Venom watched Fisk and said, in Parker's mind, "That big muscle man looks impressive. Should we go help?" Peter opened his mouth to joke about Venom suddenly being helpful, but was cut off when a silver-gray axe smashed into them from the side. The hit sent Peter and the others sprawling. If Venom hadn't reacted instantly, forming a living shield, Peter would have been gravely hurt. "Damn, surprise attack!" Peter hissed, fury lighting his features. His eyes went sharp as a trapped animal's. Venom answered, eager and savage, "Forget subtleties. Let's take those two down first." Parker lunged like a black streak at Riot, the two of them colliding violently. Jessica, scanning the battlefield, made a decision. She would go upstairs to get a better look. If she remembered correctly, there was supposed to be an old man with 4 mechanical tentacles behind them, but he wasn't here yet. The building trembled under the fury of the clash, every faction forced to choose, unite against Kingpin's newfound might or be swept away by it. End of chapter. Chapter 209, Massacre. Dr. Otto Octavius paused just outside a nondescript office, brows furrowing as he listened to the quiet ticking of the wall clocks. He pushed the door open and stepped into a modest room. Several desks buried under paperwork, a faint smell of disinfectant, and a single computer left running as if its user had fled in panic. The battle with the symbiotes had been worse than he'd expected. He and Riot had been forced to team up against the suddenly appearing Venom Spider-Man. The fight had gone off the rails, and the three combatants had disappeared into the chaos. Seeing his chance, Otto had smashed the weakened Spider-Man aside and slipped away to search the building. His mechanical tentacles flexed behind him like patient snakes. One reached silently for the exposed data port on the idle computer, a needle of alloy sliding home. The screen fluttered, then remained steady, but the machine was already his. Otto's fingers tapped the tentacle-mounted interface with practiced speed, passwords and firewalls yielding under his assault. Codes scrolled across the display. His mind moved through them with cold efficiency. After several intense minutes, a block popped up. Access restricted. Otto frowned, but he was not surprised. Whatever classified this database clearly ranked higher than the usual lab logs. He recalibrated his approach, pushed more power into the cracking routines, and watched the screen until the barrier dissolved. When the folder tree finally opened, he scanned it in seconds. Then he froze on a file stamped Confidential, storage location and security measures for Rare Element X. His heart beat faster. He opened it and read the entry aloud under his breath. The storage was on the 33rd floor. He copied the file to his own device with exact keystrokes and then severed the connection. The tentacles retracted, folding back like an enormous octopus pulling itself close. Rare Element X had been the linchpin of his research for years. If he could get it, Otto felt the familiar thrill of possibility and danger at the same time. He moved to the elevator shaft the way he always moved, practical, efficient, and began to climb. 4 tentacles lashed out and found purchase on the shaft walls, hauling him up floor by floor with terrifying, methodical strength. 31, 32, 33, he muttered as sweat beaded at his temple. At the 33rd level, he found the heavy metal doors sealing the lab entrance. His tentacles forced the hatch, prying and tearing until the doors screeched open. He stepped into the corridor and his eyes locked on the lab's placard. Before he could take another breath, something inside exploded outward. Red slammed into him like a freight train. He didn't see it coming, only a flash of blood red and the sensation of being thrown end over end. Otto hit hard. Metal groaned and sparks showered as he skidded across the floor. Pain flared in every joint. For a moment he thought he had been crushed. When he could stagger to his knees, the red thing stood over him. It was a symbiote. Every inch of it crimson and pulsing, narrow, predatory eyes, and a mouth set in a savage grin. In one hand, it held the shattered remains of a mechanical tentacle, one of Otto's alloy arms, crumpled like tin. Otto felt his stomach drop. The alloy was designed to withstand enormous force. Whatever this thing was, it had torn through it with nothing but its hands. A cold dread ran through him. This was worse than Riot or the Venom that had appeared before. The city was changing in ways he could not account for. The red symbiote toyed with the broken metal for a beat, then mashed it between its fingers until it fractured into scrap. It regarded Otto like a curious insect and said in a voice wet with amusement, "Interesting mechanical life. Like me, but far less clever. You should die." 3 of Otto's tentacles whipped up in reflex. They struck like steel serpents, fast and precise, intent on shredding the intruder. The symbiote merely smiled. Blade-like extensions ripped from its forearms, glinting coldly. With blurringly fast strikes, the red blades shredded the tentacles into fragments. Metal spat out in every direction. The wound-spun blades then whirled into a tornado that swept past Otto with lethal intent. At that moment, boots sounded in the lab. The symbiote paused, snorted with contempt, and turned away as if Otto were nothing more than litter. Otto sagged to his knees, head pounding, blood tasting metallic in his mouth. When the tentacles were destroyed, a pressure inside his skull shifted. Memories flickered back into place like cards being sorted. Norman Osborn stepped out from the lab, his silhouette framed by harsh light. He looked imposing, almost casual amid the wreckage. He crouched and offered Otto a hand, voice low and oddly steady. "Otto, are you all right?" Otto groped for context. For a moment he gaped at Norman, confusion thinly veiled by pain. "Osborne? This is the Osborne building? Why am I here?" Norman's smile was brief, brittle with concern. "You almost got yourself killed by Massacre." Massacre? The name tasted foreign and awful. Otto's mind filled with jagged images, red teeth, raw violence, and the echo of that cruel voice. His hands trembled. Norman eased a hand onto his shoulder, the touch both authoritative and oddly paternal. "You're safe now," Norman said. "We need you. Your brain, your talent, isn't something we can replace." For a long beat, Otto stared, then inhaled until his chin lifted. He nodded slowly, the resolve hardening behind his eyes. Pain remained, but purpose returned. Below in the Osborne lobby, chaos had spread like a stain. The fight between Venom Spider-Man and Riot had escalated into a deafening duel. Black tendrils and silver blades tore and tangled in the air, sending showers of sparks through the atrium. On the opposite side of the hall, the Kingpin moved like a living battering ram. His bulk was an immovable monument, every step cracking marble beneath his feet. Matt Murdock and Tony Stark stood in his path, and both knew how dangerous the next moments would be. "Tony, you give it everything," Matt told him. He snapped his two short batons together into a longer staff, bracing to try and slow Fisk down. "I'll hold him as long as I can." Before either man had time to act, Kingpin blurred and reappeared behind Tony. His fist cut through the air with a sound like tearing cloth and slammed into the Iron Man suit. Tony's armored shell was ripped from him, clanging down and crashing into the floor, punching a deep crater into the stone. Alarms screamed across Tony's HUD, and alerts painted his visor red. Tony felt the world constrict. He was stunned, adrenaline and fury flaring. "He hit me too fast," Tony snarled between grit teeth. "Jarvis, where were you?" "I'm sorry, sir," Jarvis answered, always calm but with the faintest edge of apology. "He moved too quickly. There was insufficient lead time." "Then take control of the suit," Tony ordered without hesitation. "Affirmative," Jarvis replied. Immediately, the armor's systems kicked in like a coiled spring. Tony felt a surge lift his body as the suit's internal servos and thrusters compensated. He jerked upward, just grazing the wind of Kingpin's follow-through. Fisk's huge fist swept past where Tony had been, shredding air and throwing up a gust that rattled the lights. A flicker of surprise crossed Kingpin's face. He had expected to finish Tony off for good. "Machinery can't save you," he muttered, contempt dripping from the words. Matt swung his staff in a desperate attempt to land a blow, but Fisk sidestepped with the kind of ease that belonged to a predator who never met resistance. He stomped the ground hard. Fissures spidered across the floor. Like a struck meteor, he moved again, a blur racing straight for the hovering Tony. Kingpin's focus was obvious: take the armor off and leave Tony completely vulnerable. "Jarvis, prepare for impact," Tony thought, feeling his heart try to escape his ribs and clinging to the old instinct to fight. "Understood, sir," Jarvis answered. Every system spiked to maximum alert. Tony felt the thrusters bite and the suit slide him sideways in a hairbreadth dodge. Fisk's fist smashed into the wall with bone-shuddering force. Dust and debris filled the air. Tony flipped on the suit's momentum stabilizers, throat tight with the knowledge that this battle was only beginning. Chapter 210, Red. The red and gold armor cut through the night like a metal eagle. Flames spat from the suit's boots, leaving fiery trails as Tony hovered above the ruined hall. He clenched his teeth inside the helmet. His eyes behind the visor were all hard resolve and barely contained fury. He raised his right hand and began charging the palm repulsor. Blue-white light swelled until it was almost blinding, fixed on the man standing below. Tony's mouth twitched. "Jarvis, take him out." "Roger that, sir," came Jarvis's calm, steady reply. The repulsor discharged in a single searing beam. Light cleaved the air of the hall and stabbed straight toward Kingpin. For a moment, the whole chamber seemed illuminated by that streak. The air tightened with the imminence of destruction. Kingpin sneered, utterly unmoved. Arrogance and contempt showed in his eyes, as if Tony's attack were the plaything of a child. He snorted, 50%. His body shifted. Muscles bulged, as if he were enclosed in an armor of flesh, his presence suddenly heavier, more dangerous. He thrust out a gigantic hand and slapped the incoming blast. The repulsor detonated in his palm. Flames and energy splashed outward, and he flung the blast toward Matt on the far side. The explosion thundered up through the hall, sending a shockwave that rattled the building. Matt, who had been racing toward Kingpin, was hurled back by the blast. Tony froze in midair, incredulous. He just caught my repulsor with his bare hand. Is he even human? Kingpin stood like a tower, cold confidence carved into his features. He raised his right hand, pressed thumb to forefinger, and snapped. Air itself split. A high-speed rotating air cannon formed and screamed toward the hovering suit. Abnormal air fluctuation detected, Jarvis reported. Tony slammed the thrusters to full, trying to evade, but the air cannon moved too fast. The impact jarred him violently. The suit's outer plating groaned, and alarms screamed in his ears. Warning, armor failure, suit severely damaged. Jarvis's voice stayed level, but Tony felt the danger. He fought to steady the suit. Jarvis, initiate emergency repairs. Understood, sir. While Jarvis worked, Tony drew another card. The Cosmic Cube energy cannon had been crippled in the fight with the giant beast, otherwise his odds might be better. But he still had something. He keyed the chest-mounted high-energy pulse cannon. The light in his suit swelled into a second, blinding sun. Prepare to fire the high-energy pulse cannon, Tony ordered. All systems ready, Jarvis answered. Tony's eyes narrowed behind the visor. He could not let this monster go. Kingpin was powerful and ruthless. He had to be finished. The pulse cannon's blue-white glare painted the hall and made dust motes look like stars. Tony inhaled, bracing himself. Kingpin's lips curled. You really think that will hit me? He bent as if the rigid, linear attack were beneath him. Kingpin. Tony's tone held a trace of sarcasm. You forget, I'm not fighting alone. Kingpin raised an eyebrow, and the hairs on his neck prickled. A new, chilling aura had appeared behind him. He spun to face it. Matt stood there, battered and disordered, but upright. He held an enormous, illusory blade that shimmered blue. The blade seemed to drink at his vitality and grow. The weapon had been ripped from some triangular iron-headed monster. Its power was immense, but each swing demanded Matt's own life force as fuel. He'd nearly lost an arm the first time he'd used it. After long recovery, Matt had come back anyway. Fury's warnings, his own safety, none of it mattered now. All he could see was Kingpin. He would not be the helpless bystander any longer. Kingpin! Matt snarled, voice raw with rage. He swung. The broadsword carved a blue arc through the air like a promise to cleave the world in two. Fire! Tony shouted, pushing both hands. The pulse cannon detonated, blue-white light lancing down. The blast met Matt's slash in a cataclysm of force. The hall convulsed as if the earth itself had been struck. For a heartbeat sound vanished. Then a deafening roar filled the space. The beam punched a vast, gaping wound through the floor. Stone and concrete erupted. Dust choked the ceiling until it looked like a small storm. Kingpin's outline vanished in the cloud. Matt's blade sang as it bit through the air, a cold, high whine. Then, oddly, when it fell, there was an eerie silence. No dust rose. Time seemed to pause. Matt could not hold on. He collapsed to his knees, the illusory sword bleeding out of existence. His face was ashen, sweat purling at his brow. He sniffed. The copper tang of blood was in the air. That meant his attack had landed. Kingpin had been wounded. There were traces of rust in the mist. Is he dead? Tony breathed. The suit told him his systems were almost spent. A thin edge of fatigue had crept into his voice as he asked Jarvis, "Any life signs?" "Scanning. Danger," Jarvis answered. Before the scan finished, the dust and smoke below were ripped aside by a force that was vast and sudden. An invisible wave slammed into Tony's suit. He felt it like being struck by a speeding truck. The armor was flung like a rag doll into the ceiling. Concrete shattered. Fragments rained down like hail. The dust cleared to reveal Kingpin reborn. He seemed sheathed in dark gray rippling muscle, his frame swollen to nearly 3 meters. Steel-hard sinew glinted beneath his skin. A beast-like light shone in his eyes. With each step he took, the floor seemed to tremble. Tony struggled to his feet. Alarms blared that the suit was failing. Kingpin's fist smashed into the suit and scattered it as if it were paper. The force of the blow threw Tony through wall and masonry. He spat blood and slid to the floor, stunned and hollowed. Kingpin turned his cold gaze to Matt. His mouth twitched into a contemptuous smile. "Thank you, Matt. Your attack damaged me, just enough to make things interesting." The words dripped scorn. Matt clamped his jaw and stared back with a burning defiance, but his strength was nearly gone. "You're weak," Kingpin said, voice like winter. "So you should die." He advanced and struck like a sledgehammer. Despair flickered across Matt's face, but he refused to back away. He used every last ounce of his strength to meet the blow. The impact hurled Matt through a thick wall. He vanished into the night outside, leaving a smear of blood behind. The wind caught him, and he flew into darkness. Kingpin looked up and down the ruined hall with indulgent boredom. "If I'd been allowed 80% of my strength, you might have rested easy." He swept his gaze across the battlefield and stopped on Parker, who was still locked in battle with Riot. Cold amusement cut through him. "And you," he said, "still can't finish your fight? Pathetic." He moved like a colossus toward Parker to crush the final ant. Then the ceiling exploded again. Debris scattered, a red blur dropped through the hole and landed between Kingpin and Parker. It was a slash of blood-red lightning that seized every eye. Kingpin narrowed his eyes. The red figure was a symbiote. More than that, it radiated a savage pressure that tugged at his spine. For the first time, his mask of confidence flickered. He kept his voice even. "Who are you?" The thing's mouth split open, revealing jagged fangs and a long, stained tongue. It spoke with manic, grating delight. "My name is Carnage." Carnage's laugh was like metal on bone. "I know you, Kingpin. Someone like you should be dead." Kingpin sneered. "Sorry to disappoint you. I'm very much alive." Carnage's grin widened into madness. "Perfect. Then let me finish you. This will be fun." Venom and Riot, mid-fight, froze. They both stared at the newcomer, stunned and uncertain. "What?" Venom rasped disbelief raw in his voice. He studied the red symbiote as if recognizing a face from a nightmare. That's my spawn. It's red." Parker's mouth opened. "You can have offspring?" "I have no idea how." Venom snapped. "This is not my doing. Those lab coats, look what they've made." Riot's expression tightened. He watched Carnage move and felt a prickling dread. "This guy is stronger than us," he said flatly. Carnage seemed to drink in their reactions. He laughed again, cruel and delighted. "You fools. Today I kill you all. Venom, after I gut this one, you're next." Venom muttered, uneasily deflecting. "Is this some kind of tradition? Next generation of symbiotes trying to kill their parent? Weird." Parker just shook his head. "Strange tradition, yeah." Carnage's eyes burned with obsession and hunger. He fixed Kingpin with a look of pure bloodthirst. Kingpin, far from cowed, showed a flash of excitement in return. "Finally," he said, "a worthy opponent." Carnage snarled, a streak of crimson fury. He launched himself like red lightning straight at Kingpin. "As you wish." Chapter 211. Failure, bang, bang, bang. Carnage became a streak of red lightning and slammed into Jin Bing. The crimson figure tore across the night like a meteor, radiating ferocity and murder. Countless red tendrils lashed out like demonic claws, coiling into fists and hammering down toward Jin Bing. For a moment, the world seemed to be swallowed by blood. Jin Bing's vision flushed red. He didn't try to dodge. He simply met the onslaught, letting Carnage's fists rain down with thunderous crashes. Each blow was a detonating force. The air itself shuddered. An unexpected force rippled out from the strikes, and Jin Bing's boots began to slide backward across cracked stone. Bricks and paving fractured under him. His skin flushed from slate gray to the color of red-hot metal, steaming where the cold night hit it. Jin Bing's eyes flickered. He drew a deep, volcanic breath, his chest swelling until it looked ready to burst, and then he roared. "Ha!" The blast of air hit Carnage like a hurricane, and the symbiote reeled back, howling, a raw, tortured cry like something from the depths of hell. Its tentacles drew in. The red figure was blasted back, tumbling through the air and landing some distance away in a mangled heap. Its shape wavered and shifted, a little awkward for the moment. Jin Bing stayed planted like a rooted tree, gaze like twin blades fixed on the fallen beast. He was breathing hard, his chest heaved, but outwardly he looked unbroken. The effort had not drained him as much as it seemed. Carnage's eyes flared again. In an instant, it condensed into another streak of vermilion light and lunged. This assault was faster, angrier, hungrier, like a predator intent on tearing its prey apart. Dozens of tendrils struck forward, writhing like venomous snakes toward Jin Bing's vitals. Jin Bing clenched both fists, every muscle coiled into steel. He didn't yield. He waited until the last possible moment, and then unleashed a single, concentrated strike. Their fists met in midair with a sound like a world-colliding thunderclap. The impact smashed Carnage's tendrils to pieces. Red ichor spattered and arced like gore blooms. The red figure cartwheeled through the dust, hurled by the force of the blow, and slammed into the rubble. The ground shuddered under the impact. Gravel and dust exploded outward, and the wounded symbiote carved a deep groove as it skidded several meters. Pain numbed Jinbing's hands and joints, but he didn't hesitate. He advanced, each step a pounding declaration. Determination lit his eyes like an immovable mountain. His movements hit the ground like hammers. Sweat stung and steamed in the air. "I won't believe your body's stronger than mine," he bellowed, his voice an overwhelming thunder. Carnage reared up, transforming arms into blade-like appendages that flashed cold. It launched itself into the air, the tendrils at its back coiling like springs. Riding the debris of the shattered ceiling, it fell like a red meteor aimed straight for Jinbing. The air filled with the metallic tang of blood. Jinbing's eyes narrowed. He twisted his right arm backwards until it ballooned with muscle, veins standing out like ropes. He planted his left foot hard. The concrete cracked in a spiderweb beneath him. Pulling the strike together, he threw his fist forward as Carnage slammed into him. The collision set off a storm. Wind screamed, and masonry exploded outward as shockwaves rippled through the ruined room. Sparks flew from the meeting of Carnage's blade and Jinbing's fist. A hideous smile split Carnage's face. Madness glinted in its eyes as its power swelled like a rising tide. Jinbing ground his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging. Mist curled from his perspiration like the aura of a god come to earth. Even then, his stare never faltered. "Think you can beat me?" Carnage snarled, voice laced with contempt. "I'll show you what true strength is," Jinbing replied, unyielding. Their powers locked in the air, neither giving ground. Tendrils hunted for a gap, but Jinbing met them with precise, crushing blows. The wreckage spread, shaking the surrounding buildings. Then one of Carnage's appendages whipped around and wound itself tight around Jinbing's right arm, wrenching to pull him in. Jinbing snorted. He brought his left hand thundering down, smashing the tendril free. Carnage only grew more frenzied. "Last-ditch move," the symbiote crowed, arms cleaving into blades and slashing again. Jinbing focused and fired. His right fist rocketed like a cannonball into Carnage's chest. The creature convulsed. Blood sprayed from its mouth as its body was flung like a rag doll. It smashed into a wall, burying itself in rubble. The impact caused the wall to collapse, crushing the fallen form beneath the debris. For a moment, everyone breathed easier. If that was the end, then victory belonged to Jinbing. Venom let out a shaky sigh. Parker hesitated. He didn't move to help Carnage. Both of these fighters were enemies in his eyes, and he'd rather see them both take heavy losses before picking them off one by one. Riot watched with a sullen face but didn't move either. Jinbing walked slowly into the rubble, eyes glittering cold. "It's over," he said quietly, the weight of the words like thunder. The body under the stones shifted. Suddenly Carnage sprang up, blades for arms thrusting forward, straight at Jinbing's heart. Jinbing snorted, swung his right hand, and the punch detonated with a low, rolling boom. His fist struck Carnage's chest like a sledgehammer to steel. The symbiote line had been broken. The creature was flung like a kite with a shredded string, tore through the damaged outer wall, and crashed out onto the ground outside the Osborn building. The pavement cracked under it. Dust and concrete leapt into the air. The surrounding officers had already retreated to safety, leaving a few abandoned squad cars silhouetted and forlorn. Jinbing walked up to where Carnage had fallen. His steps were heavy, each one punctuating his dominance. He bent down and looked at the ruined shape on the ground. His eyes were a cold blade. "You lose, Carnage," he said, voice deep and absolute. For a breath, the red thing was still. Then a ripple ran across it, and its grotesque mask of teeth and sinew shrank back like a wet cloak. The horrifying face peeled away, revealing a human face underneath, one Jinbing knew too well. "So it's you," Jinbing said, a flash of anger igniting in his chest. "Long time no see, Harry." Harry opened his eyes and smiled faintly. The smile was tired, almost apologetic. Across town, in an office far removed from the chaos, Pierce stared at a report on his desk as if the words had burned him. Fury had escaped. his face contorted with disbelief and rage. "Fury got away?" he barked. "All of you are useless." He threw the microphone he'd been clutching. It smashed against the wall and scattered into pieces. He swept his desk with a sweeping gesture, papers, notebooks, cups, sending them tumbling to the floor. His assistant at the door clutched a folder so hard her knuckles went white, stunned into silence. Pierce's chest rose and fell like a caged animal. He'd spent so much effort and laid the net so carefully. How had Nick Fury slipped through? "Call me about Bruce Banner," Pierce barked when he could force his voice to steady. The secretary hurried to the phone, fingers trembling as she dialed. It rang and rang. No answer. Her face went pale. She almost started to cry. "Sir, no one's picking up." Pierce's scowl deepened until it could have cast a shadow. Bruce Banner was another crucial piece. If they couldn't secure him as well, their position would weaken further. But Pierce had one play left to make. A dark light flickered in his eyes. "They'll come to rescue him," he muttered. "When they do, I'll make them all die." His voice was low and venomous, like a snake in the dark. Meanwhile, Nick Fury was holed up in a safe house on the other side of the city, calmly assessing the situation. The safe house sat in the basement of a rundown apartment building. Its walls were lined with bulletproof plating and the door sealed by a complicated electronic lock. Dim lights cast the maps and reports on the table into sharp relief. The mood was tense, but Fury's expression was steady as he studied an intelligence brief. Agent May, fingers flying across a keyboard, looked up. "Director, there's been nothing in S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. No unusual movement. It looks like they haven't realized you were attacked." Hawkeye leaned against the wall, his gaze sharp and alert. His hand brushed his bow as if expecting to draw it at any moment. "No movement is the worst sign," he said. "It could mean the news is being suppressed. They might have control of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the inside. We can't go back there." Fury sat forward, muscles coiled. "We can't just wait to be picked off," he said. "We've got to hit back." He rose and walked to the center of the room, looking May and Hawkeye in the eye. "Whatever their plan is, it's bigger than taking me. We don't have much time." May paused and met his gaze. "Sir, what do you want us to do?" Fury's expression hardened. "We're going to their doorstep." The three of them readied themselves. Time for defense was over. Now it was time to strike. End of chapter. Chapter 212. Full Strength. Pierce stood alone in the spacious office, the bright desk lamp throwing his shadow long across the floor. Documents lay on the desk, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He held the microphone, his voice low and steady. "How's Carter doing?" "It's been arranged," came the quick reply from his subordinate, edged with a little nervousness. Pierce nodded slowly and set the microphone down. A cold glint passed through his eyes. He had already put people on Peggy Carter, the woman always near Fury. He was sure Fury would not ignore her if she were in danger. He would jump at the bait. This was the trap Pierce had been building toward. A thin smile curled across his mouth. He could picture Fury tangled in it now. He reached for the glass of water on the desk, then froze when he found it empty. "Someone pour me a glass," he called impatiently, his voice echoing in the large room. Silence answered him. The lack of response made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. Alert, he opened the drawer, took out a pistol. The cold metal steadied him a little, but anxiety tightened his chest. "If I were you, I wouldn't move." The voice tightened Pierce's throat. He turned slowly, every muscle braced. Fury stood in the doorway as if he'd emerged from the shadows themselves, tall, wrapped in darkness, arms crossed, eyes cold and unyielding. "Fury, you scared me," Pierce said, forcing a laugh. "I thought it was an assassin." "In a way, you were right," Fury shot back, sarcasm laced under the steel. Pierce tried to appear unconcerned, glancing toward the doors as if hunting for Hawkeye and Agent May. Fury read him and shook his head. "Don't bother looking for them. They're not here. It's just you." Pierce wore a hypocritical smile. "Who would I be looking for?" Fury stepped forward, pressure in every quiet step. Pierce's fingers tightened on the pistol. He was dealing with a man who had seen too much to be easily fooled. "You know, Pierce, your plan has more holes than you think," Fury said coldly. "You think binding Peggy Carter will get me to you? You underestimate me." Pierce's facade slipped for the first time, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Peggy Carter's situation has nothing to do with me." "Really?" Fury's sneer was low. Then why are you so nervous? The question hit Pierce like a stun. Pretense crumbled. With a defeated breath, he admitted, "All right, I was involved, but you have to understand, this is for the greater good." The greater good? Fury repeated, contempt plain on his face. Is the greater good your excuse for sacrificing innocence? Pierce's eyes hardened. You're naive, Fury. The world runs on the law of the jungle. To achieve anything, sacrifices are inevitable. Fury closed the distance until the air between them felt tight. You're wrong, he said quietly. A truly strong person doesn't take what he needs by hurting others. He protects them. Rage flared across Pierce's face. He leveled the pistol at Fury's chest. What makes you think you can change anything? You're an idealist. This world will swallow you. Fury didn't flinch. He looked straight into Pierce's eyes, reading the fear behind them. Pierce, you've already lost. At that moment, the office door burst open. Hawkeye and Agent May stormed in, weapons trained on Pierce. Color drained from Pierce's face. He'd been outmaneuvered. Fury's voice was flat and commanding. Drop your weapon. Pierce's hands shook. Finally, he let the gun fall to the carpet. Hawkeye and May moved in, cuffing and securing him. Fury watched, expression unreadable. Your conspiracy ends here, he said, the cold in his voice unmistakable. As they led Pierce away, Fury stayed in the office for a long moment, watching until the footsteps faded. He allowed himself a short, heavy sigh. Men he'd once fought beside were now enemies. He wasn't sentimental for long. There was work to be done. On the other side of town, in the Osborn building, the chaos had receded, and the truth revealed itself. Harry Osborn stood and faced the world, and the reactions ran the gamut. Peter Parker's face broke into joy he couldn't control. Tears pricked his eyes. Months of watching over Harry, of living with otherworldly threats and fragile hope, had made Harry more than a childhood friend. He was a lifeline. Seeing Harry back felt like a weight lifting from Peter's chest. Memories tumbled through his mind. Norman Osborn in the labs, the terrifying Venom symbiote, Harry unconscious in a hospital bed. He finally understood that Norman's team had extracted a new symbiote from Venom's body to treat Harry. Why not just use Venom? Peter asked aloud. Why go through all that trouble? Venom answered in Peter's mind with a sour, almost amused tone. Because I won't be with that man. I hate him. Peter forced a small, rueful shrug. The symbiote chooses its host, he said softly to himself. Not everyone reacted so lightly. Dr. Bob, Kurt Connors, went pale, a mix of fear and awe in his eyes. He had been present for some of the monstrous fights and the brute power they'd faced. No wonder that carnage was so strong, he murmured. Its host was Homelander, Harry himself. Across the room, Kingpin's booming laugh rolled like thunder. The giant man strode forward, his presence oppressive enough to make the air itself shudder. Come on, he challenged, fists clenching. Our battle's not done. Kingpin wanted this fight to settle something only he could see. Harry, now a living, terrifying force, didn't back away. His expression hardened. Fine, he said coolly. I'll show you what real power looks like. The two men collided like titans. Peter and Dr. Connors watched, hearts in their mouths. Peter wanted Harry to win, but he dreaded the blow. Connors stared, struggling for breath in the face of such raw intensity. Even Riot fell quiet. The room's loudest presences were suddenly mute observers. Kingpin charged like an enraged beast. Every step left dents in the floor and cracks in the pavement outside. Harry moved with the calm, measured precision of someone born to fight. Neither showed fear, only relentless determination. Show me what you've got, Kingpin roared, and then struck. The air screamed as if it were tearing itself apart. Harry slipped aside, then countered with a punch to Kingpin's abdomen that sounded like a war drum. Kingpin staggered, but grinned with a wild, approving roar. That's it! That's the fight I wanted! The two traded devastating blows. Every strike packed unimaginable force. The sound of fists on flesh was the sound of thunder. It was a dangerous, brutal ballet. Power and artistry blended until it blurred the line between combat and spectacle. After a fierce exchange, they drew back, breathing hard, blood and sweat on both faces. Each bore fresh damage and the same unyielding spirit. We're evenly matched, Kingpin panted, awe softened by anticipation. This is only the start, Harry replied, eyes burning colder than before. Now I get serious. Kingpin's voice changed into a thunderous shout. Full muscle, 100% release. The effect was immediate. Kingpin's already enormous frame swelled further, muscles bulging as if pumped full of molten energy. The atmosphere seemed to warp around him, wind and dust swirling like a small storm. He looked suddenly prehistoric, every tendon and vein like a living force. Harry's response was no less dramatic. A red light gathered at his core and spread, warm as magma and hot enough to make the air shiver. He rose slowly, hovering off the ground, an aura of power that was both mountain-still and ocean-wide. "Let's finish this," Harry said, voice deep and controlled. Before anybody could blink, both combatants blurred into motion, too fast for eyes to follow. In Peter's vision, they became after-images, two streaks of devastation that moved like raw lightning. The gusts they kicked up shredded trees, buckled asphalt, and sent windows flying. A jagged gully opened across the street, tearing buildings along its path into ruins. Smoke and dust climbed into the night sky. Peter clenched his teeth and bolted after them. He couldn't be a bystander. Dr. Connors and Riot, stunned by the scale of the destruction, melted back into the shadows to regroup. On a rooftop overlooking the scene, Norman Osborn watched with a small, calculating smile. "Not bad," he said to himself, watching the distant roar. He folded his hands, eyes gleaming. "But I'm still far from being able to beat that purple symbiote. There's still work to be done." Chapter 213, Leaving Boom, Boom, Boom. The little Osborn building could no longer contain the violence exploding inside it. Kingpin and Harry tore through the cramped office like living earthquakes, smashing walls and furniture as they collided. Their fight spilled out onto the busy street, leaving chaos in its wake. Kingpin stood like a mountain of muscle. Steel-hard limbs, cold, fearless eyes, an animal poised to tear its prey apart. Every movement carried raw, destructive force. Every punch seemed to cleave the air. Harry looked leaner by comparison, but he was wrapped in a searing red light, as if some unfamiliar power clung to him. Flames burned behind his eyes, anger, determination. His motions were a blur of speed and power, a streak of red lightning probing for any opening in Kingpin's defense. This had become more than a pure showdown of strength. It was a clash of wills. Harry's fists tightened, the red light flaring brighter. He leapt and shot twin beams from his eyes at Kingpin's chest. The rays burned and warped the air, space itself trembling where they passed. Kingpin snorted, his muscles suddenly like forged armor. When the beams struck him, there was a metallic screech, but he didn't flinch. He stood his ground and only smiled with contempt. "Harry," Kingpin rumbled, his voice like rolling thunder, "do you really think you can beat me with that?" Harry didn't answer. He gathered the red light again, preparing the next strike. Retreat was not an option. Doubt had no place. He fought for justice and for freedom, and that belief burned in him brighter than the suit's glow. They collided again. Each impact sounded like an explosion. Buildings shuddered, cars overturned, streetlights snapped. The avenue dissolved into panic. Pedestrians screamed and scattered as the two men tore the world apart around them. Harry moved like a living flash, darting around Kingpin, testing, striking. Kingpin was immovable, each counterpunch a crushing wave. The red halo around Harry grew until it seemed to set the sky on fire, painting the ruined facades in hellish light. Harry's pulse hammered in his ears. Every breath, every beat of Kingpin's heavy steps echoed like an omen. Kingpin's blows were getting vicious, each one packing the force to sunder steel. Harry felt the air churn from them, felt how close he was to being overwhelmed. Yet the wild determination in his chest kept him in the fight. Suddenly the symbiote suit flared. A surge of energy burst through Harry, unprecedented, tearing and rebuilding him at once. The red glow intensified until half the sky was crimson. The suit tightened like a second skin, as if alive, amplifying his strength and speed. Harry felt every cell cheering. He felt, for the first time, truly dangerous. Kingpin only scoffed. "Fancy power won't beat my fists," he snarled. "I only trust my own strength." He threw a furious haymaker, the air whistling as his fist cut through it. Harry twisted and dodged in the air, but Kingpin's assault came like a storm, dense and relentless. Shadows of fists filled his vision, then a concentrated barrage hammered him. For a moment, Harry steadied himself, centered. His eyes flashed like knives. The red light flared even brighter. He stopped defending and attacked. Moving between Kingpin's swinging hands like a blade of light, Harry struck, bare-knuckled, into Kingpin's abdomen. A burst of red flung out on impact like a detonating core. Kingpin groaned and stumbled. The pavement cracked beneath him. For an instant, his eyes were those of a wounded beast. "Do you think that's enough?" Kingpin bellowed, and his body swelled as if pumped full of iron. Muscles bulged, and his next punch came down like a thunderclap, compressing the air into a hurricane aimed straight at Harry. Harry danced through the maelstrom, finding tiny windows to breathe. His heart pounded, sweat stung his forehead, his nerves stretched to breaking. He knew he couldn't take a direct hit. Kingpin's force was too great. Still, his speed made him hard to pin down. Unless Kingpin landed a direct, crushing blow, Harry's mobility made him nearly untouchable. Kingpin's expression flickered with frustration and something else, fear. He had pushed himself to an extreme he hadn't intended, his muscles straining under a state of near-total exertion. It was powerful, but it was burning him out. If this went on, his body would begin to fail. That thought made him savage and reckless. He wouldn't let himself lose to a kid. The battle teetered on the edge of something worse when a streak of bright green cut through the air and dropped between them. Banner crashed down, a hulking, bandaged figure standing like a mountain in the wrecked street. "You two, stop! If you don't, I'll break both your limbs," he shouted, voice hard with anger. Banner was worse for wear. He'd been badly hurt fighting Godzilla and had been patched up by Tony. Bloodied bandages wrapped his arms, but nothing could stop him from intervening. He'd just broken up a group of Hydra agents who'd come snooping about the sewers, and he was done watching the neighborhood get wrecked. Kingpin narrowed his eyes, uneasy at the green giant's presence. Harry's face went pale. He had been so consumed by the fight and the red suit's rush that he hadn't noticed the collateral damage he'd caused. "Get out of my way," Harry snapped at Banner. "Don't stop me from taking this criminal down." "Criminal?" Banner shot back. "You think you're any better?" He gestured at the ruined street. "You don't get to do whatever you want because you wear a mask." Harry opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words died. Banner was right. The destruction, the danger, it had been on him. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Kingpin slammed his fist into the pavement. Thick, choking smoke spit up and spread like a dragon, muffling sight and sound. When it cleared, Kingpin was gone, vanished into the confusion. He had no intention of testing his body further in front of witnesses and enemies. He would withdraw and fight another day. Harry hovered, breath coming in ragged huffs, the red light around him sputtering. The reality of what had nearly happened sat heavy in his chest. He had a lot to learn. Banner watched Harry a second longer with icy appraisal, then turned and left. He had his own fires to fight, but he hoped, maybe more than he would admit, that the young man had learned something from the lesson. The streets slowly returned to a hollow kind of peace. Harry's suit chattered in his head. "Massacre, you were enjoying that," a voice sneered. "Humph, don't pin this on me," another voice shot back. "We're the same," Massacre insisted. "You were loving the fight. So what if it wrecked a few things? Why care what anyone thinks?" "You don't understand." Harry sighed, shutting his eyes. He breathed, steadied himself, and forced his expression back into something calm. He flew toward the Osborne building, eyes fixed on the ruined interior where one figure waited. "Father," he said, voice low, "I'm back." Inside the demolished office, Uncle Ben had been hauling a chunk of concrete away to free someone trapped beneath it. The ceiling groaned and then collapsed in a shower of plaster. Those nearby cried out. A dark shape darted through the debris, throwing itself between the falling rubble and the wounded, knocking the worst of it aside to drag Uncle Ben and the injured clear. Uncle Ben exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Black Cat." "You're welcome," she said, brushing dust from her suit. Jessica, who had been watching from the edge of the chaos, added with a smile, "I was worried something bad would happen to you, but it looks like you're the one rescuing people now." Black Cat shrugged, "Just passing through." "Were the others taken care of?" Uncle Ben asked, anxious. "Not sure," she admitted, spreading her hands, "but it's quiet now." Then Norman Osborn appeared at their side, slipping through the destruction with an unsettling calm. "Latest reports say Harry pushed the attackers back," he said with a thin smile. "He's awake." "Harry?" Uncle Ben and Jessica both brightened. Outside, on the ruined facade, a man in black combat gear pressed against the wall. He muttered to someone only he could hear. "Parker, no, I don't want them to know I'm on you. They'll take me away." A different voice, darker, amused, answered, "All right, Venom, I won't tell anyone." "Really? Really?" Satisfied, Peter Parker shot a web line and launched himself away, the black-clad figure clinging invisibly to him. The city mended its breath, and for now the battle had ended. Chapter 214, Anger. The hotel suite was half dark, the curtains only partly drawn so slivers of sunlight cut across the carpet. On the sofa sat a boy of 16 or 17, clutching a glass of water so tightly the liquid trembled and reflected the tension on his face. He took a breath and lifted the glass. It was snatched from his hand before the water reached his lips. "What's wrong, Steve?" Sharon asked, rising from the other sofa, confusion and worry in her eyes. Steve held the glass now, staring at a hairline crack along its rim that glinted in the sunlight. He looked serious, his voice low. "Maybe I'm being overly cautious, but if this cup broke while William was drinking and shards went down his throat, it could easily kill him." Jenny went pale and gripped William's arm so hard her knuckles showed white. "Oh God, that!" William stared at the cracked glass as if he couldn't quite process it. His throat bobbed and he swallowed. "Could death really cause something like that?" he whispered. Steve shrugged helplessly. "We've had so many accidents these past 2 days. Weird things happen. We have to be careful." The memory of those days made William's skin crawl. The last 48 hours had felt less like chance and more like deliberate cruelty. He remembered the dinner that had been abruptly shattered by a snapping sound. Jenny's chair gave way, and she cried out as she fell. Sharon had lunged and grabbed Jenny's arm, saving her from slamming to the floor. Jenny collapsed, pale and drenched in cold sweat. They had barely recovered from the shock when shots rang out from outside. Steve had instinctively raised his shield, and a stray bullet splintered against it, skittering across the floor and coming to rest at William's feet. They had escaped, by sheer luck, twice in one night. Now William gripped Jenny's hand so hard it hurt, his eyes wide with terror. Steve narrowed his eyes and scanned the room, thinking out loud. He noticed a pattern: Sharon, then Jenny, then Steve, then William. Each of them had an accident in turn. "Maybe the Reaper's picking people one by one," he said. "Have you noticed the intervals are getting shorter?" Sharon asked. She had been tracking the incidents as closely as anyone, analyzing, connecting dots. Her expression was sharp, threading the events together into a worrying picture. William nodded. 2 nights ago, nothing happened. Yesterday, there were 2 accidents. Today, another right after we woke up. Jenny raised her hand timidly. I feel like it's angry." The idea of anger from death sent a fresh chill through the room. William's face drained of color and his fists clenched. Steve's jaw set. They couldn't just wait to be picked off. "We can't keep being passive," Steve said. "We have to find out what's behind this," Sharon agreed. "We can't just sit here and wait to be murdered. Maybe we need help, an exorcist or a psychic." After a long moment, William nodded. His fingers were white from gripping the sofa. "All right, we have to try everything." Jenny shivered, but drew breath to be brave. "Then let's go now. Don't waste any more time." Sharon turned to Steve. "I have a friend who knows things. He recommended a very effective psychic in the city." Steve's face closed. Inside, he felt torn. He thought of the Holy Lord, the incomprehensible figure who had given them options before. None of those options had felt right. One way would mean killing or replacing others to satisfy death, which broke every moral line he had. The other required enduring a series of accidents, hoping to outlast death's pursuit. Both choices were catastrophic in different ways. He worried the others couldn't bear it. A voice he didn't want to hear slid into his head, impatient and commanding. "Oh, stop stalling. Let me decide for you." Steve startled and hissed under his breath. "Holy Lord, don't!" But it was too late. A force surged through him, stripping away the control he thought was his own. His legs moved of their own accord to the window. He threw the curtains wide, and the sunlight carved his face into hard angles. For a moment, his features twisted into something not entirely his. He raised his middle finger to the sky and shouted, voice raw as thunder, "What the hell, you damn Grim Reaper? Come and kill us if you dare." The room froze. Every eye snapped to him. Shock, disbelief, terror. William looked as if someone had punched the wind out of him. "Steve, what are you doing?" he croaked. Steve's eyes glittered with an odd red light, and a grin that didn't reach them curved his mouth. "I'm helping you make a decision," he said, cold and terrible. Sharon lunged for him, panic searing her voice. "Steve, wake up! This isn't you!" Her fingers dug into his arm. She tried to yank him back, but his body was rigid like iron. He looked at her with frozen disdain and shoved her with enough force that she slammed into the coffee table and hit the floor. Jenny stumbled back until she hit the wall, breathing fast, eyes full of horror. "What is happening?" she cried. Sharon scrambled to her feet, eyes wild with fear. "It's the Holy Lord. He's controlling Steve." None of them had fully grasped what that name meant, but Sharon's tone left no doubt, something older and more dangerous than any of them had laid hands on Steve. The lights began to flicker, as if an invisible hand were throttling the wiring. The curtains whipped as a wind picked up. The air tightened, heavy with the metallic tang of a storm. A low, dry chuckle sounded, not from any throat in the room, but as if the house itself had exhaled amusement. Steve's voice had gone small and cold. "You should take care of yourselves," he said. Then the voice echoed, not from him but like a presence in the room. "Death is coming." As suddenly as it had taken him, the control left. The red in Steve's eyes faded. He stared for a second as if woken from drowning and then snapped to attention. Outside, daylight dimmed to a sickly gray. Thunder rolled and the temperature plunged. The windows burst inward with a terrifying gust, showering the room with shards of glass. Lamps and mirrors shivered and began to break. Jenny screamed, clamping small fists over her ears while tears streaked down her face. Steve's pupils contracted and he barked, "Get out now!" Sharon didn't hesitate. She grabbed William and Jenny and bolted for the door. A car, lifted by a sudden tornado, smashed through the shattered window where they'd just been standing. The impact rattled the walls and sent a spray of splinters and glass across the room. Steve slammed his shield up and used it to block flying debris, then sprinted out after them. Outside the hotel, the world had been turned inside out. Traffic lay twisted, buildings were ripped and smoking, power poles were snapped like twigs. Black rolling clouds churned overhead, and the air was alive with the scream of wind, glass, and tearing metal. It looked like a city in the grip of an apocalypse. "The Reaper's furious," Steve snarled, every muscle taut. He planted the shield and moved as if the ground were his to command. They had to find shelter. If they could keep moving, maybe they'd survive. They ran. A bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, and it split in a catastrophic roar, falling and blocking their path. Sparks rained down as branches snapped. Rubble and splinters littered the street. Steve led them around the fallen timber, his shield taking more showers of embers. The ground itself wasn't safe. A jagged fissure yawed open, and a chasm gaped where the pavement had been. William stumbled, almost toppled into the black maw, before Steve's hand shot out and hauled him back. "Thank you," William panted, voice barely audible over the chaos. Sharon's breath hitched as she looked skyward. "Captain!" she cried. Steve followed her gaze to see an airplane, black smoke streaming from its tail, slewing downwards like an iron comet tearing towards the earth. It clipped the skyline and slammed into a building nearby, erupting into a thunderous inferno. "No!" William screamed. Fire roared, and heat hit them like a second storm. The world collapsed into a scene of ruin and flame. William's throat burned, and his eyes snapped open. He was in the hotel bed, heart pounding and soaked with sweat. Steve was at the edge of the bed, and Sharon hovered nearby, both of them watching him with fear and exhaustion written on their faces. "You okay? Bad dream?" Steve asked, voice hoarse, tired lines at the corners of his eyes. William wiped his palms along his trousers and tried to steady his breathing. "It was terrible," he said. "A nightmare." Steve studied him for a moment. "Was it about us?" William nodded vehemently. "Yes. Steve, we all die. Everyone dies. It was a dream of the future." Steve's face tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "The future isn't fixed. Tell me exactly what you saw." William inhaled slowly, forced the memory into words. "It was the Holy Lord. He controls you." Chapter 215, Museum. The hotel room felt as if it had frozen around him. William sat on the edge of the bed, face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. The dream he'd woken from had shaken him to his core. Steve, Sharon, and Jenny stared at him in stunned silence, trying to process what he'd just described. The god of death can be angry? Sharon finally whispered, voice trembling. He has emotions? To them, death had always been an impersonal force, cold, automatic, a law rather than a person. The idea that it could feel, be insulted, or vengeful turned everything they thought they knew upside down. William kept replaying the dream in his mind, as though its events had actually happened. The Holy Lord he had seen, an entity he shouldn't even have known about, made Steve worry that this was a warning, not just a nightmare. Steve's hands clenched into fists. Anger surged through him, at the fate William described, and at the faceless voice that seemed to dictate it. Holy Lord, he thought, furious. Why are you doing this? Didn't we make an agreement? The voice came back in his head, cold and dismissive. I've indulged your delays long enough, it said with thin amusement. Everyone but you will die eventually. What's the point of waiting, Steve? Time is precious. Steve felt an invisible hand tighten around his chest. Everyone will die for sure, he shot back, refusing to accept it. No, there has to be another way to save them. There was a short, contemptuous laugh. Didn't you hear the brat? With my aid, only you could survive a plane explosion. Push me further, and even I might have to send an extinction event. Maybe a meteor. A meteor. The thought made Steve's stomach drop, but he calmed himself quickly. He wouldn't surrender. Then protect me now, he bargained. If I help you regain your strength, you protect us all. That's our new deal. The pause on the other end felt interminable. Then the voice replied, almost amused. If you find what I need, I can promise you that. Relief washed over Steve. Brief, cautious relief. He knew what that promise would cost them, a nearly impossible search. He straightened, looking at Sharon, Jenny, and William. We can't stay here, he said. We have to go find whatever is fueling him. If there's a source of power, that's our best shot at fighting back. Sharon's brow tightened. Where do we even start? Steve's expression hardened with resolve. We start with the talismans. They're tied to him somehow. It may sound insane, but it's the only lead we have. William, still shaken, nodded. If that dream was a warning, then we have to try. I'll do whatever I can to help. They all agreed, fear laced with determination. All right, Steve said, pack up. We're going to the British Museum. The British Museum was one of the most famous collections of antiquities in the world. Intelligence had flagged an object there, an ancient zodiac-like talisman embedded in a relic. It radiated something irregular enough for S.E.I.L.D. to include it on their priority list. They left the hotel with only what they needed. On the drive to the museum, every shadow and passing vehicle made them flinch, each rumble on the road a reminder of how close danger could be. William sat in the back seat, glancing anxiously out the window. What's on your mind? Jenny asked, slipping her hand into his. Her voice was soft, trying to pull him out of his spiraling thoughts. I keep thinking about the dream, William admitted. His voice trembled. What if it's true? What if the god of death really is after me next? We'll keep you safe, Jenny said, squeezing his hand. You won't face it alone. They parked, left weapons and heavy gear in the car, and walked to the museum with only personal belongings. Steve pulled William aside. You were the one in the dream, he said. Be careful. Sharon and I will watch your back. Don't wander off alone, understood? William swallowed and nodded. I understand. They went through security and entered. The moment they crossed the threshold, Steve felt a thrill in his head, an excited, eager presence. One of the 12 talismans is here, the Holy Lord's voice crowed in his mind. It's here. Steve let himself feel a small flicker of triumph. If they could find it, they were one step closer to honoring the bargain. The Holy Lord urged him on. Now, go, take it. Steve glanced at the crowd of tourists and shook his head. Relax, he muttered under his breath. It isn't going anywhere. They moved through the great halls, passing Egyptian mummies, Greek marbles, and delicate Chinese porcelain. Each artifact carried centuries of history, but their focus was narrow. They were looking for a single item, a zodiac talisman, and specifically, the rat talisman intelligence had reported. William's heart thudded faster as they walked. Every guard, every lens of a security camera felt like a potential obstacle. Jenny stayed close, a quiet anchor at his side. Over there, Sharon whispered, pointing to a display case. They stepped closer. Within the glass rested an Egyptian mummy, wrapped in linen, its painted funerary mask gilded and serene. The hands were crossed across the chest, fingers bearing several rings. One ring, unlike the others, held an octagonal stone etched with a tiny, exquisitely detailed rat. "That's it," Steve breathed, "the rat talisman." The Holy Lord's voice buzzed in his head, nearly frantic. "Give it to me." William's mouth went dry. "How do we get it out without setting off alarms?" he asked. "We need a plan." Steve forced himself calm. "We don't rush. We can't just grab it in front of everyone." Sharon leaned in. "We could create a distraction, draw the guards away. And do it at night," Steve added. "Fewer people, less risk." "No, wait until night," the Holy Lord snapped in his mind. Its tone was sharp and impatient. "Now." As if answering the command, the stone in the ring pulsed. A faint inner light blinked once, twice, then vanished as if sinking into the mummy's linen. Steve felt a cold premonition tighten his gut. The mask's painted eyes flared red. The mummy rose. At first, people gasped. Then a tourist screamed. The glass over the display shattered with a roar. Jagged shards of safety glass sprayed outward like shrapnel. William, standing nearby, lost his footing as a palm-sized fragment zipped directly toward his head. Time seemed to slow. He didn't think, couldn't move. Something grabbed him by the arm and yanked him out of harm's way at the last second. "Are you all right?" Sharon hissed, pulling him back, voice shaking. William took a shaking breath. "I'm fine. Thank you, Sharon." The crowd descended into chaos. Tourists pushed and ran. Security officers shouted into radios, trying to coordinate. The mummy, animated by whatever force lived in the rat talisman, moved with jerky, unnatural life. It raised one finger towards Steve when he tried to move forward. An invisible wave of force slammed into Steve, throwing him backward. He flew through the air, crashing into display cases on the way down, and hit the floor hard. Security officers recovered quickly and opened fire. Bullets tore through the air toward the standing figure. For a heartbeat, it looked as though the rounds would rip the thing apart. Instead, the bullets seemed to freeze in mid-flight, an unseen barrier stopping them a few feet from the mummy. The mask's eyes flashed deeper red. Then, impossibly, the bullets reversed direction, flying back the way they'd come, slamming through the bodies of the officers who had fired them. Blood sprayed, and the sound of people collapsing turned the panic even more hysterical. Screams rose as the crowd surged for the exits. People trampled each other in the stampede. Sharon shoved William and Jenny to the side, away from the crush. She kept them low behind a display, breathing hard but focused. She had trained for chaos like this. If not for her quick thinking, William might have been crushed. Steve pushed himself up, dizziness blurring the edges of his sight. He saw the mummy reach and grab the staff mounted in an adjacent case, an ornate, man-sized pole that looked ceremonial. It struggled with the weight for a moment, then gripped it with both hands. The movement was deliberate, as if a practiced rite was being resumed. Steve's mouth went dry. "No way," he muttered. He watched the figure raise the staff. Could he have been some sort of priest? Chapter 216, Rat Spell Chaos, filled the museum. Tourists surged for the exits like startled birds. Screams and cries overlapped until the great hall thrummed with panic. Glass cases toppled, shards scattered, and priceless relics skittered and cracked across the marble floor. In the center of it all stood the spark of the uproar, a mummy reanimated by the power of a rat talisman. It gripped a staff as tall as a man, raised its withered hands, and rasped in a voice like gravel being ground together. "I have returned from the Styx. I shall rule the world again. You will be my servants." The mummy's words rang with something like sorcery. People felt it in their bones. Its dry skin clung to its skeleton, its empty sockets glowing a faint green. Each movement carried the weight of age and something ancient and terrible, as if a king had crawled out of a tomb after millennia. Steve lay on the floor, breathing hard. He pushed himself up and looked at the mummy priest radiating that malevolent aura. Inside his head, a voice answered his private question. "Holy Lord, of course not. I saw how hard you were fighting. I couldn't bear to leave you. Steve, you're going to take over my body? You can't handle him. Leave it to me. I'll lend you my body." A surge of force erupted from deep inside Steve and seized control. His eyes flared red, tiny scales rippled across his skin like armor. Power thrummed through him, raw, destructive, immediate. The mummy priest noticed the change and peered down at Steve with a half smile. Not bad soul power. You might be worthy to serve me. The Holy Lord's voice echoed in Steve's mind with a cool, mocking tone. But you are not fit to be my servant. You should die. Under that will, Steve's body launched itself at the mummy with impossible speed. Each footfall gouged the floor, the air sizzled with energy. The staff's runes began to pulse as the mummy priest muttered a low, ancient chant, but the Holy Lord moved too fast. Before the incantation could complete, he was upon the priest. "Do you think you can rule the world?" the Holy Lord sneered. His voice carried contempt and an unmistakable edge of killing intent. He swung his arm, and a flash of fire erupted, flames licking across the mummy's bindings and devouring the staff. The priest bellowed, a sound full of pain and rage, and tried to use dark magic to douse the blaze. But each attempt was overwhelmed by the Holy Lord's power. "You are nothing but a corrupt remnant that should have stayed buried," the Holy Lord intoned. His words struck like hammers and carried their own cruel force, seeding fear even into the ancient being. The mummy priest's green eyes dimmed as its body convulsed in the inferno. It fought desperately, but the fire consumed it. With a final, tortured cry, it collapsed into a heap of dust, and the rat talisman fell from where it had hung on the priest's wrist. "Good," the Holy Lord said, smiling thinly. He reached for the talisman, but the moment his fingers closed, it flashed with a light that stung his eyes. He stiffened. Other mummies, still lying in cases and on plinths, stirred, animated by the talisman's power. A massive sphinx statue shook itself, leaped from its pedestal, and roared at the intruder. "Not good," the Holy Lord snapped. Fury flashed through him. "This is my power, thief!" He lashed out. Flame erupted again, roaring up like a dragon from the floor and swallowing half the museum in its maw. The resurrected mummies and the sphinx writhed in supernatural fire, their bodies shriveled and turned to smoke. Resistance was futile. In a matter of moments, the hall looked as if a curse had been unleashed. Charred display cases, pillars blackened, relics ruined. Where the mummy priest had stood, only dust and the fallen talisman remained. "This is your end," the Holy Lord declared, cold and absolute. He scooped the rat talisman up and slipped it into his pocket. It pulsed faintly against his palm, as if still full of intent. "Steve, take care of my talisman." The control that had filled Steve abruptly ebbed. He felt the invisible bonds lift and the borrowed strength drain away. Weakness washed over him. The scales on his skin faded. He breathed hard, dizzy from the after effects, and watched the dust drift in the ruined hall. The Holy Lord's voice echoed again in his mind, this time softer, almost approving. "I've recovered some of my power. This is only the beginning. Keep moving forward." Steve closed his fingers around the talisman in his pocket and drew a ragged breath. The flames died down, leaving a stinging smell of smoke and burnt fabric in the air. Standing among the wreckage, he felt a bitter mix of relief and resolve. There was no going back now. He would press on. Night in South America was damp and heavy, pressing against the city in a blanket of heat and humidity. In a very different arena, a roar of a different kind rose from an underground cage. "The winner, our Sonic Fist Eddie." The crowd thundered approval as Eddie stepped out of the ring. He raised his hands and let the cheers wash over him with a faint smile. Up close, he was still calm. Each victory was another step in a plan only he fully understood. Earlier that week, he had been an unknown drifter. Now he was the hottest name in the Viper Gang's underground boxing circuit. Men watched him with something between admiration and fear. Respect bought as much by his skill as by the force of his fists. Eddie didn't care which it was. He had never wanted a throne in that underworld. He wanted something far bigger. Back in the locker room, he found Burton waiting. Burton was the gym's nominal owner and the Viper Gang's central figure, a middle-aged man with a mohawk and a hungry smile. "You deserved that," Burton enthused, clapping Eddie on the shoulder. "You handled that glutton like he was nothing." Burton's eyes glinted with calculation. Each of Eddie's wins translated to more money, more bets, more influence. Eddie's smile was small and noncommittal. "So who's next?" he asked, putting on a deliberately casual, defiant air that delighted Burton. "Carlos, the raging beast," Burton said lowly. "He's no ordinary foe. He's a real animal in the ring." Eddie had already heard the rumors about Carlos. Brutal, insane when he fought, a man who relied on crushing force above all. Exactly the kind of opponent Eddie wanted, someone to test him, to raise his name. "I'll take him," Eddie said, and Burton beamed. He patted Eddie again and left, confidence written all over his face. Later, the arena filled again. The crowd's shouts shook the basement as Eddie faced Carlos in the ring. The big man was all raw muscle and coiled menace, eyes bright with a dangerous hunger. When the bell rang, Carlos charged like a beast. Eddie moved with the calm of a predator that knows its prey. His punches were precise and fast, lightning that landed like hammers. Carlos's assaults were thunderous but clumsy beside Eddie's speed. The crowd grew louder. Carlos's face reddened with frustration. He had always ended fights with one terrible blow. This time he was pushed around. "Coward!" he roared. "If you're a man, fight me head on." Eddie smiled, a trace of scorn in it, and gestured with a curl of his finger. "Come then, let's see whose fist is harder." Carlos, furious and prideful, charged with everything he had. As he closed, Eddie vanished from sight. Carlos couldn't stop his momentum. His fist tore through the ring's barrier with a deafening crash. The audience gasped. If that punch had struck Eddie, it could have ended the fight, and worse. "You promised not to hide," Carlos bellowed, spinning to face Eddie. Eddie shrugged, cool and unapologetic. "You win in a head-on fight. This is underground boxing. Anything goes. You lose." Carlos lunged again, but Eddie's speed neutralized the beast's brute force. Blow after blow, he wore the giant down until Carlos crumpled, unconscious. The arena erupted in shouts as Eddie stood in the center, arms raised. Something down by Carlos's gloves caught Eddie's eye, an octagonal stone that had fallen and clicked onto the floor. When the crowd was distracted, Eddie slipped it quietly into his pocket. In the locker room, Burton met him with the same greedy grin. "You're unstoppable," he said. "Even Carlos, he's supposed to be unbeatable." Eddie returned the smile without revealing what he'd really taken from the fight. Burton's ambition would keep bringing stronger opponents, and every one of those wins would add to Eddie's reputation and resources. But those were only steps toward the endgame Eddie had in mind. He didn't need the Viper Gang to own him. He intended to use them. Chapter 217, Cow Talisman. Eddie returned to the villa the Viper Gang had assigned him, but he couldn't calm down. The house sat deep in a quiet wood, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to cut it off from the rest of the world. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in a patchwork on the ground. Shadows flickered as he crossed the yard. Inside, he paused at the windowsill, glanced at the thugs posted by the door, and pulled the curtains closed to make sure no one was watching. Then he took the small stone he had taken from Carlos and laid it in his palm for a closer look. The stone was an octagonal column, smooth and faintly lustrous, as if it held some inner power. In the slant of sunlight, a pattern shimmered on its surface. Eddie squinted and felt his breath catch. The pattern looked like a bull's head. The memory of Steve's talk about the 12 talismans, each with mysterious powers, flashed through him. Could this cow talisman be one of them? If so, could that explain how Carlos had wielded such unusual strength? Hope kindled in Eddie's chest. He felt the impulse to test it immediately. There was no sign Carlos had used any complicated ritual in their fight. Eddie hadn't heard any words either. The method couldn't be elaborate. He closed his eyes, gripped the talisman, and focused on the warmth pulsing from the stone. The moment he tightened his fist, a violent force surged through him like lightning. Every cell in his body seemed to roar. Energy flooded his limbs until he had to move. Instinctively, Eddie threw a punch. The wall in front of him exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Bricks and plaster rained down, dust billowed, and a huge hole yawned where solid wall had been. Sunlight poured in, blindingly bright. The thugs who had been guarding the villa rushed toward the sound, faces white with alarm. They searched for an attacker and found only Eddie standing by the gap, staring at his own fist in stunned disbelief. "It's okay," he said quickly, forcing a grin. "Just trying out a move I thought of." The men exchanged uneasy looks. Eddie had a reputation as a street fighter. He'd won plenty of matches. But ripping a wall out of its frame was something else entirely. Admiration mixed with fear in their eyes. For Eddie, the realization hit like a second punch. This was something new, a power that could change everything. The energy from the cow talisman thrilled him, but it also made him aware that everything ahead would get more dangerous. He would have to learn to control it, or be consumed by it. All right, you lot handle the place. I'm gonna sleep in another room. Yeah, sure. The men murmured assent and watched him go. Eddie slipped the talisman into his pocket, its faint glow against his thigh. He debated whether to report it. The captain was trying to gather all the talismans, after all, but there were so many of them already. For now, until the captain finished collecting, he decided to keep this one to himself. To him, the cow talisman felt like a weapon powerful enough to turn the tide against the cult of chaos. Meanwhile, under a cloudy London sky, Steve and his team had their own problems. They had managed to recover the rat talisman at the museum, but that victory had been anything but quiet. The chaos they caused in the galleries set off alarms, and MI5 was now hunting them. After making such a scene, it was only logical the British authorities would treat them as suspects. Hurry, get moving. Steve's orders came sharp and urgent as they sprinted through a maze of backstreets. Sharon kept close by, her face taut with concentration. William and Jenny trailed, hands clasped together, sweat beaded on Jenny's brow. Each of them replayed the museum disaster in their minds and felt the same cold unease. They had made noise here, and the sound had attracted attention. Inside an MI5 conference room, the mood was very different. A middle-aged officer sat at the head of a table, jaw tight, frowning at the reports. "Have you identified them?" he asked. A younger agent stood and answered, nervous. "Two have been identified. They're American, just high school students here as tourists. One of their companions died in an accident 2 days ago." The officer's brow tightened further. High school students involved in a major museum incident? He let out a snorting laugh of disbelief. "College kids didn't start this. I think we're dealing with American agents." "And the other two?" he demanded, eyes flashing. "Their identities are false," the agent replied. "They've left no trace. We can't pin them down." The officer slammed his fist on the table. "Damn it. They brazenly send people to behave as they like on our soil. This can't stand. Bring them in, alive. We need to question them." "Yes, sir." Back on the run, Steve and the others darted through narrow alleys where the buildings bristled overhead like silent sentries. Footsteps pounded behind them, agents drawing closer. Jenny glanced back, terror flashing across her face. "They're coming! Over here!" Sharon hissed, steering them down a tight lane. They emerged in front of a small, unassuming cafe. Sharon pushed the door. A bell tinkled, and a low hum of conversation halted as the owner, a lean man who could pass for the cafe boss, looked up. "Follow me," he said without preamble. Steve shot Sharon a questioning glance. She smiled in a way that calmed him. "He's with us." They followed him through the little front room and into the back. With practiced speed, he lifted several loose floorboards and revealed a dark opening. "This is a secret basement I built," he said. "Hide down there. Stay quiet." Sharon went first, then William and Jenny, clutching each other. Steve slid down last. The owner replaced the boards and resumed cleaning as if nothing had happened. Moments later, a squad of MI5 officers pushed into the cafe, gruff and expectant. "Have you seen 2 men and 2 women? 2 of them underage?" The lead agent demanded, flashing his badge. The owner blinked, startled. "No, I've been just tidying up in here. No one came through." They searched the room thoroughly, then, finding nothing, filed back out. Once the door clicked shut, the owner's face finally relaxed. He glanced at the floor, imagining the hidden mouths of the basement below. He hesitated to call them up immediately. Better to wait until he was sure the agents had moved on. Down in the basement, a soft orange light glowed. Steve pulled the rat talisman from his pocket and turned it over in his hand. If the warning from the Holy Lord hadn't stuck in his head, he might never have guessed that a seemingly ordinary stone could have enough power to reanimate an ancient mummy. "Is that what we were supposed to find?" Sharon asked. Steve nodded. "Yes. I found out there are 12 zodiac talismans, each with incredible powers. They might be our only defense against whatever the god of death is trying to unleash." William shuddered as the memory hit him. "I almost died in that accident at the museum." "It really looked like the Grim Reaper's work," Sharon said quietly. Steve's expression went serious. "The Reaper picks targets and turns the world against them, using whatever's around. That's why you need to keep on guard. The next accident will be worse if we're not prepared." Sharon inhaled and nodded. "I know. I was caught off guard before. Not again. William and Jenny exchanged a look and squared their shoulders. If they were alive, it was because of Steve and Sharon's quick thinking. Both wanted to do whatever they could to help and not be a liability. Where to next? Sharon asked. Steve thought for a moment, then answered with quiet resolve. We leave Britain. We go to Greece. Chapter 218, Shocking Secret. Okay, Mr. Osborne, this building is yours now. Tony Stark's voice filled the new glass-walled conference room like the opening note of something important. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows and picked out the white bandage on his arm. He looked tired but composed, almost cheerful despite the injury. Opposite him, Norman Osborn sat turned slightly in his chair, a faint, controlled smile on his face. Thank you, Stark, he said, low and steady, gratitude flickering behind his eyes. A few days earlier, the Osborn building had been badly damaged, the ground floor lobby and nearly all the supporting columns destroyed. It had been declared unsafe for office use, and Norman had been forced to find other space fast. Tony had just finished a new tower. He sold it to Norman at a favorable price, which solved the immediate problem. You're welcome, Tony said, with that practiced half-smile and a touch of detachment. He wasn't the reckless young rival he'd been. Death and danger had a way of changing priorities. He'd learned to value the people around him and even to respect old adversaries. Norman, call me Tony, he added. Then his tone shifted to something quieter and more serious. I have another purpose for this meeting. I'd like to invite you to join the Illuminati I started. Illuminati? Norman frowned slightly as he considered the name. Yes, the group exists to handle world-level threats, crises that could endanger humanity. There are 3 of us so far, including me. They're people I trust. Tony kept his eyes level and steady. I want you in. Norman's surprise was faint, quickly replaced by interest. Being part of something that operated on a larger stage appealed to him. All right, he said finally. I'll join. Welcome, Tony replied, rising to shake his uninjured hand. They clasped hands, 2 of the richest, most powerful men in the room, an agreement that felt like the start of a new chapter. And for a heartbeat, it was. Then a flood of images hit Tony like electroshock. He saw Norman's body blur and be replaced in a mirror by a different man, alone, sealed behind glass, frantic and desperate. He saw the Norman sitting across from him snap his fingers and, with a terrible casualness, shatter the other man's soul until it dissolved into nothing. Tony went pale. The man opposite him was a fake? Was the real Norman already gone? What's wrong, Tony? You look ill, Norman asked smoothly, an amused lift to his voice. Ahem, my injury's still raw, Tony lied, forcing a cough to hide the panic. He let go of Norman's hand. Sorry, I'd better go rest. Norman watched him with a practiced, concerned smile. Go home and rest. The world needs you, he said, the words carrying the faintest edge of smugness. Tony managed an exaggerated smile, waved, and left. Once the door clicked shut, Norman's mild smile curved into something colder. He had deliberately fed those images into Tony's head, planted them to watch the reaction. He felt a subtle, private triumph. The dynamics of their game had shifted in his favor. Outside in the corridor, Tony's face darkened. He moved faster, the footsteps of his rapid pace echoing hollowly. Happy, his bodyguard, hurried to keep up. Wait up, boss, Happy called, out of breath. Don't sprint like a man being chased. The attempt at levity landed flat. Tony didn't look at ease. The thing he feared wasn't a literal monster. It was one worse, the idea that the Norman he'd known might be gone or replaced. He slammed the car door and sat for a long moment, breathing hard, trying to force the images down. The mirror scene replayed in his mind like a film loop. The hand clasp, the flash of another face in the glass, the snap of fingers. If Norman wasn't himself, if someone or something was replacing people, what did that mean for the serum Norman had been developing? Why would an imposter go to the trouble of creating a superhuman program? Was it altruism or something far more sinister? Where to? Happy asked from the driver's seat, glancing through the rear view. Home. Or S.H.I.E.L.D. First home, Tony said finally. He needed the lab, needed his own space to think. Happy drove them to the mansion in silence. The sun threw clean light over Tony's face as they pulled up. He moved with the mechanical certainty of someone carrying a heavy secret. Boss, you okay? Happy asked cautiously as they stepped inside. Tony forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'll be fine. I just need to clear my head. If you need anything, Happy started. I know. Tony's relief at the offer was real. Happy's loyalty had a way of steadying him. Thanks. Once Happy left, Tony went straight to the subterranean lab, the one place he could turn confusion into data. He sat at the console, stared up at the blinking cameras, and spoke to the house AI. Jarvis, pull every piece of news, recorded footage, and social media trace on Norman Osborn from the last 6 months. On it, Jarvis answered, calm and efficient. Upgraded and faster than ever, the system fed data into Tony's display in a rolling stream. Tony sifted through it, scanning small changes. A tilt of the head in a speech, a slightly off note in a recorded laugh, the way his handshake lingered longer than before, subtle things that suggested someone was hiding something. Then his mind snagged on Harry. Before the serum, Harry had been the mild, bookish sort. After it, after the injections, he'd become volatile, brutish in confrontations. The serum's documented side effects were terrifying. They could amplify darker impulses, make violent those who'd never been violent before. He's not simple, Tony muttered. He pictured what the serum could do in the hands of someone without a conscience, someone who could replace a person and erase the original. The thought tightened his chest. If the serum enabled body takeovers, if some entity from the mirror could slip into a host after the injection, then he'd already lost people around him without knowing it. Keep tracking Norman's movements, cross-reference his calls, his meetings, anything unusual in the past 3 months, Tony ordered. Understood, Jarvis said. Data scrolled, flags popped up. Tony's worries multiplied with each new item. Norman's public behavior and his private movements didn't always line up, and there were discrepancies that just didn't fit an ordinary cover-up. Someone, something, seemed adept at playing the part of Norman. What was the endgame? Power? Control? Some other motive Tony couldn't pin down? He felt like a man whose house was full of strangers wearing his friends' faces. If the worst was true, there wouldn't be a safe harbor left. Superheroes, colleagues, allies, anyone who'd been given the serum might now be compromised. Tony's jaw set, panic flared, and then, like a cut that scabbed over, hardened into resolve. He couldn't trust anyone else to untangle this. He had to start alone. I need a better suit, he said aloud, more to focus himself than to speak to Jarvis. Evidence to prove Norman's a fake, a way to expose him and end this. He stood and moved to the workshop proper, fingers already flying across the keyboard. Schematics scrolled, components cataloged, simulations spun up. Each motion narrowed his panic into purpose. Norman, I won't let you win, Tony promised quietly to the empty lab, and then to the man, whatever he was, sitting behind the Osborn face. He would find the truth, he would build what he needed, and he would strike. Chapter 219. Vampire night had settled over the neighborhood. The cafe owner stood by the front window, watching the dark sky and feeling a small, grateful sigh slip past his lips. The rush of the day was finally over. Only a few lone figures drifted along the street, and the dim streetlights made everything outside look hazy and still. He stretched, ready to close up and head home. He reached for the door, flipped the open sign down, and just as he was about to lock up, a figure appeared in the doorway. The man was dressed in a black coat and tilted a gentleman's hat, cutting a sharp silhouette against the fading light. He lifted his head just enough for the owner to see a handsome, unnaturally pale face and eyes that seemed to hide more than they showed. The owner froze, a chill winding through him before he managed, "Sorry, I'm closing. Could I wait a while? I'd like a cup of coffee." The man's voice was low and magnetic, carrying an authority that made refusal hard. The owner was about to decline, until the man deliberately lifted his coat and the metallic glint of a pistol at his waist met his eyes. The room went colder. He swallowed and forced a steadier tone. "Okay, what would you like?" "Black, no sugar." The answer was brief and precise. "Come in then," the owner said, nodding. There were no other customers. Maybe the man was simply a strange-looking patron. The stranger slipped inside, took a seat, and watched the cafe with hawk-like focus. The owner, still uneasy, prepared the coffee with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. He wondered who this man really was, some agent searching for Sharon and the others, or a gang member. The pistol at his waist made the possibilities feel almost too real. He left Steve, Sharon, William, and Jenny in the secret room downstairs and prayed quietly that the visitor only wanted coffee. When the owner set the cup down, the man smiled and said, "Thank you." The owner felt the smile as a pry, as if the stranger could read his tension. "This place doesn't seem very peaceful," the man murmured, with a teasing lift to his voice. "What do you mean?" the owner asked, forcing calm. "It's just, the air feels unusual here." The man's smile stayed, but his eyes darkened. The owner's unease grew into something sharper. He kept glancing at the stranger as if he could find answers in that pale face, but nothing clicked. The man seemed content to sit, eyes scanning the room as if cataloging everything. Then heavy footsteps sounded at the door. The owner's stomach dropped. A large figure filled the entrance, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a black leather jacket that gleamed under the cafe lights. Sunglasses hid his eyes, and slung across his back was a long sword, sheathed in an ornate scabbard, etched with strange runes. The man's presence felt like thunder in the quiet space. Before the owner could react, a massive hand closed on his throat like an iron clamp. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He folded to his knees. The newcomer walked slowly across the floor, sword at the ready, and fixed his gaze on the man in the black coat. His voice was flat, measured. "Brooks," the man in the coat said, "do you really intend to fight me to the death?" Brooks' expression didn't move. He drew his sword with deliberate slowness. The blade flashed cold under the lights as he leveled it at the stranger. "It is my duty to eradicate all vampires," he said without inflection. "That includes you, Charles." Vampire. The word hit the owner like a blow. Vampires were legends, not neighbors. His eyes widened in terror. He tried to cry out, but the hand on his neck crushed sound into a hoarse whisper. A new, icy dread crawled under his skin. Charles laughed then, a low, cold sound that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. His lips curled back, revealing sharp fangs. Red gleamed where his pupils reflected the light. "Do you think you can kill me and walk away?" he snarled. The owner felt the grip on his throat squeeze as if in answer. He was dimly aware of Brooks's sword drawing a wide, glittering arc. For a dizzy second, everything slowed down to the duel alone. The two men, the humming tension between them. "Don't move," Charles warned, voice as dangerous as the blade. "Move, and I'll break his neck." Brooks' reply was cold and quiet, the sort of voice that steeled a room. "No matter how you struggle, you cannot escape death. This is your fate." Outside, a new sound rose. Many quick footsteps, low growls, the soft patter of more feet closing in. Brooks's jaw tightened. He turned his head and froze. Shadows were forming at the doorway, faces gleaming red in the dark. Figures with two keen teeth and eyes like coals pooled around the building. Charles' expression brightened with a cruel hunger. "You hunt our kind, Brooks. You think we wouldn't retaliate?" he taunted. In one sudden movement, he drove his hands forward and snapped the owner's neck. Blood spattered the tiled floor. The owner slumped, life extinguished as quickly as a candle snuffed. Brooks' tense outrage turned into a blade's motion. Before Charles could revel in his victory, the sword cracked forward, lightning fast, and found the space between breastbone and heart. Charles reeled, eyes wild and terrified for the first time. "No," he breathed. Then the words, "My master will avenge me," blew out like smoke as his body turned to ash and drifted away. The doorway burst open as the rest of the pack flooded inside. With the owner dead, there was nothing to keep them at bay. Vampires poured through in a tide of teeth and claws. A crimson-scented chaos filled the cafe. Brooks moved like a man who had spent his life learning violence. He hacked and slashed, steel meeting fang and bone. The sword sang as it fell. Blood splattered the counter and furniture. He fought forward, once, twice, then turned to face the swarm and braced himself. "Come on!" he yelled, as much to steel his will as to taunt them. Below, in the secret room, Steve and the others had been trying to breathe between sparse bites of food. William and Jenny, spent from the day's terror, had drifted into an uneasy sleep pressed against one another. Steve and Sharon remained awake, tension keeping them alert. They still felt raw from the first wave of attacks. The Holy Lord had warned them there would be two more, each worse than the last. Steve's worry wasn't the agents. It was the darker things that might come. He thought of the talisman in their protector's possession, the rat talisman, and of the Holy Lord's voice murmuring inside his head. "I only have one right now. Find me 3 more talismans, and I might be able to protect the others. 3 more. Steve had swallowed and felt the heavy distance of that need. Noises swelled from above. Shouts, the clash of metal, an animal roar. Steve and Sharon exchanged a glance. Did they find us? William mumbled from the edge of sleep. Probably not, Sharon said, but there was doubt in her voice. I'll check, Steve decided. Stay here. Watch them. He took his shield, eased the secret door open, and peered out. The corridor smelled faintly of iron and something fouler. He stepped into the stairwell and closed the secret door behind him. The sounds were unmistakable, fierce fighting and the unhuman roars of things that did not belong to this world. At the top of the stairs, the sight hit him like cold water. A handful of pale, red-eyed figures had pinned a broad-shouldered man with a great sword. They moved with a predatory grace, teeth bared and faces twisted in hunger. Steve's breath caught. The legend he'd always known as nonsense showed itself in flesh and fang. Vampires, he whispered. Chapter 220, Take Action. Eric Brooks was a daywalker, half human, half vampire, a living intersection of darkness and light. That inheritance let him walk in sunlight, but it had also fixed a fate on him he could never escape. His mother's murder by a vampire left a wound that never healed. He had been there the night her life was torn away, and the memory had become a blade at his heart. He swore vengeance and learned to wield that blade. People called him the Blade Warrior. Lately, he'd been hunting rumors through the London nights, a new pack of vampires moving through the city, preying on people with reckless abandon. Anger burned in him like fuel, drawing him deeper into the shadows. Every fight was a knife edge, every swing of his silver sword a promise. Then, during a fierce chase after a vampire named Charles, Brooks lost him and found himself driven into a small cafe, only to walk into an ambush. Vampires converged, fangs bared. There wasn't time to think. Brooks planted his feet, raised his silver sword, and swung. The blade flashed cold, and the first attacker went flying, a scream cutting through the room as the vampire collided with furniture and hit the floor in a spray of blood. The sight should have been a relief, until the wound knit itself in front of his eyes. Flesh closed, blood sealed. The creature rose, unharmed. Brooks' pupils tightened. These were not the simple, terrified beasts he'd fought before. They moved with an animal fury, but healed like something enchanted. Silver had always been his answer, but here it seemed pointless. Charles's fragility and Brooks' memory felt out of place amid these monsters' resilience. Someone, something, had changed the rules. A light scent cut through the metallic tang of blood and rot, a startling breath of spring flowers that hung like a sunbeam in the gloom. Brooks' head snapped toward it, a human smell. He dodged a scratch that would have taken his shoulder and looked straight at the source. A man barreled out of a back room carrying a battered shield, eyes set and jaw hard. He was fearless, and for a moment hope flared, until the vampires swiveled like wolves and lunged at him. "Hey, watch out!" Brooks yelled and moved to intercept, praying the arrival was soon enough. To his surprise, the shield was more than protection. The man swung it like a battering ram, knocking vampires aside. They flew through the air, howling, crashing into tables. Blood and the sound of ripping filled the cafe. Brooks didn't hesitate. He cut silver arcs across the air until the room looked like a grim pageant of falling limbs and red. The new man, Steve, glanced at him in passing and gave a brief, sharp nod, an unspoken acknowledgement. Then, without delay, he fought his way to the side of a downed man on the floor and crouched to check him. "He's dead," Steve said, voice tight. Anger flattened his face. He balled his fists until his knuckles whitened and his fingertips bled from the pressure. Brooks shook his head. "Sorry, he was killed by vampires. I couldn't get to him in time." "Vampires?" Steve's tone was half disbelief, half a rising fury. "They did this?" His hands trembled. His chest worked as if he wanted to break something with his bare palms. Brooks' own voice went low. "Yes, they drink people. He cut off, tasting old bitterness. "I'm used to this. But these ones, silver doesn't slow them, they heal." He cupped the silver sword as if to reassure himself. All the old rules, silver, garlic, holy symbols, sunlight, should work, not like this. Steve's face fell, dread spread there. If we can't kill them, more people will die. He looked toward the hidden trapdoor in the floor, their old refuge. "We need a plan." Brooks said, "Run. Hide them somewhere safe. Lock them up until we can figure this out. Inside Steve, something answered. He had been carrying a presence long enough to know how to call it, half blessing, half curse. Quietly, he asked, "Holy Lord, any way to stop them?" The voice that came back had an edge of amusement. "Locking them up will do. You're asking the right questions, for once." Hearing the Holy Lord's mockery and then a promise, Steve's mind snapped into motion. Violence wasn't the only solution. If killing failed, containment might buy time. He thought of the underground secret room where they'd hidden before, but that chamber held Sharon and the others. Luring the vampires in would endanger them. "You found me a talisman, didn't you?" the Holy Lord purred. "Fine, I'll help." Steve felt an answering surge ripple through his limbs, a raw force that blurred his vision. When he blinked, his eyes were red at the rims, pupils aflame with a fanatic light. An evil presence thickened the air around him, coarser, darker than any vampire Brooks had ever seen. Even the attacking creatures stuttered back, instinctively recoiling and whispering fear. Brooks's grip tightened on his sword. "What?" The Holy Lord's voice echoed with the smallest hint of triumph. They sensed danger. Convenient. Steve fought a losing battle for control. The foreign power pulsed like a drumbeat in his chest, stronger than before. "Holy Lord, don't," he warned inwardly, half pleading. "Humph, you should be grateful I'm using my energy for you," the Holy Lord replied. Then, with that imperious authority, it seized the rat talisman Steve kept tucked away. The charm flared with white light so bright it washed the secret room in a sun-like glare. The vampires shrieked and shielded their faces, stumbling back. The light didn't just burn their eyes, it seemed to force them toward surrender. The floor trembled, and the air filled with a groaning as something massive shifted beneath the building. When Brooks opened his eyes again, two enormous figures had risen from the ground beside the Holy Lord. They were dragon men, towering, covered in blue-gray scales, rippling with muscle. They stood like twin cliffs, heatless and absolute in their stillness, eyes like living coals. Brooks felt a chill. He'd seen strength before, but nothing like this. He'd thought the Holy Lord was a voice, something spiritual. He hadn't expected guardians carved from nightmare. The Holy Lord gestured. One dragon man strode to the cafe's exit and brought a single colossal fist down on the door. It shattered like a prop. Wood and paint blasted outward. Without missing a step, the dragon man shoved aside a battered sofa that had been concealing an entrance and revealed the secret room beneath, their hidden cellar. A cold voice cut the air. "Little girl, bring that little devil out now, or you will die down there." Sharon, who'd been pressed into the secret room with William and Jenny, froze. She understood in a heartbeat that Steve was no longer entirely himself. Fear and fury collided in her chest, but she swallowed both and led William and Jenny up into the light. Before she could speak, one dragon man waded into the crowd like a tidal wave. The creatures who had attacked them were suddenly small and pathetic in its hands. It plucked them up and threw them into the underground room, as if tossing chickens into a pen. The other dragon man guarded Sharon and the others, until the last vampire was hauled through the doorway. Brooks stood amid the wreckage, sword in hand, watching it happen. The sight of those scaled giants and the merciless way they handled the vampires left him stunned. He had come to destroy monsters. Tonight he'd watch them herded like livestock, and the knowledge that something else, someone else, was pulling strings in London settled over him like a dark, heavy cloak. This was not the end. It was only the beginning.